see if they're all here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session of the August 26th meeting of the Portland City Council. Would you please call the roll?
Salzman.
Here.
Novick.
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish. Here. Hales.
Here. Welcome, everyone. We have a single item on the council calendar. I'll have our clerk read it in a moment, but just some basics first before we get started. This will actually be the continuation of a previous hearing from a week ago. There are people who are signed up to speak from that hearing who didn't get a chance to be heard, so the purpose of today's hearing is to hear them and then to give the council a chance to deliberate and to discuss the report that's in front of us. If you're here and signed up to speak, I think we'll be trying to allow each person 2 minutes just because of the number of people, assuming that most of them showed up. You don't need to give us your address, just your name if you're here to speak. Obviously, we'll maintain the rules of decorum here in the council chambers as we always do, and that is if you agree with someone and want to show your support for their position, feel free to give them a thumbs up or a wave of the hand, and vice versa. If you disagree with someone and really want to demonstrate that, give them a thumbs down or some other polite hand gesture. But we ask that we not make vocal demonstrations in favor or against our fellow citizens' points of view in here so that this council gets to hear them. So that's the situation. I'll ask our clerk to read the item since we haven't done that yet. Item number 901.
901. Accept the private for-hire Transportation Innovation Task Force recommendations on taxis and transportation network companies. Final report.
And Commissioner Novick, do you have any comments or suggestions before we start hearing folks?
Just that this is an opportunity, of course, to hear from people who didn't get a chance to testify last week, and also for the council to identify any questions that they'd like the task force to continue to explore. I mean, the task force has done tons of work, and at some point they're going to have to close up shop, and it may not be that they have the capacity to explore every question people might be interested in having them answer, but they're willing to entertain taking a further look at some additional questions. We've got a number of people here who are available to answer questions of various kinds. I believe that we have Kenton Brine, Assistant Vice President of Property Casualty Insurers Association, to give us that industry's perspective on insurance questions people might have, take us into the briny deep of those questions, as it were. We have Brooke Steger and Caitlin O'Neill available from Uber to talk about TNC questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a Lyft representative today. We've got Jody Yates and Ken McGarr to address private for hire program questions. Also, just want to say a bit about the timeline. We received the task force's report on August 20th. We're going to have a complete status report on October 7th. I expect to have a council work session on a draft final regulatory proposal late October, early November, and the pilot expires on December 19th, so our deadline for having final regulations would be before that.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Mayor, can I just make a comment?
Please.
At the last hearing, I noted that the technical issue before us today is whether we accept a report. And in my view, accepting a report is a ministerial action. There's a report, we accept it. It doesn't mean that we are accepting all the recommendations. It means the report goes from the committee to the council for further action. As the commissioner in charge just noted, we are not today taking up final regulations. So I just want to signal for people that are testifying, what is helpful for this commissioner and potentially my other colleagues is not having 30 people all say the same thing, because there's no extra credit for just having cumulative testimony. It's having people identify specific issues of concern and educate us about your point of view. But 30 people singing off the same hymnal doesn't get us as far as very surgical comments that allow us then, once the testimony's over, to discuss what are our next step. And I think there's going to be some discussion about directing staff to do some things over the next 120 days. And I'd hate you to miss an opportunity to frame your concern by just singing off the same hymnal for the next 2 hours. So please don't feel you need to repeat a common theme in the testimony. If there's something very specific you want us to understand, please take advantage of the time to educate us. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or suggestions? All right, thank you. Let's go to the sign-up sheet of those that, again, signed up but didn't get a chance to speak before. Again, our apologies for that, and thanks for being able to be here if you are here today.
And we have about 13, I've counted,
Okay.
signed up. First, Mukhtar Abdu, Guy Ocker, and Matt Consola.
Okay, come on up, please.
And then they'll be followed by Blake Carson, Wind Dyer, thank you, and Delilah Jones.
All right. Thanks very much. I think you're on first. Go ahead.
Age before beauty.
Go ahead.
I want to thank you for taking the time to do this.
Just give us your name again.
Oh, I'm sorry, my name is Matthew Consola.
Thanks, Matthew.
And I'm speaking on behalf of the rideshare companies. I wanted to start off saying, I was very frustrated after last week's meeting. A lot of things were thrown around that just wasn't true by people just making conjecture. So I'm hoping that you're able to take a lot of this with a grain of salt, because it really doesn't matter what I, as an Uber driver, think about this and what the cab drivers think. It really depends on what the customer thinks. They wouldn't be choosing to use the rideshare companies, if there wasn't a problem, and if they, didn't want to use them. And the reason the numbers are up is because they like the service better. In the Portland Tribune on January 2nd, a report was made that over 1 million people are moving to Portland because we are the #1 destination. 1 million people in the next 5 years. Last week, we heard that there wasn't enough rides going around, and that the rideshare companies were, taking all the business. Yet the majority of people using the rideshare apps are people from out of town. And with 1 million more people coming, we have horrible freeways here right now where it's bumper-to-bumper traffic at 2:30 in the afternoon. We need to get these people off the road. And with 2 or 3 more cab companies coming on board, obviously there must be enough work to go around if there's all these cab companies coming around. I personally work mostly the 12 midnight to about 5 a.m. I know Commissioner Fritz was concerned about surge pricing, and I could say that, most of the time that I'm working those hours, it's not surge pricing, but there is some, because the surge pricing is there to let us know that more cars are needed. And I try to go out in areas like Hillsborough or Lake Oswego where more cars are needed, and I don't concentrate in downtown.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mukhtar Abdo. First, I want to thank you, our commissioners, our mayor, everybody here to let us to work Portland. And Portland is a great city for everybody. It's not for a particular company. It's not particular, like what we see now when we drive in Uber, especially radio cab drivers is the one who, wherever they see us, they do something bad action. But I want to tell them this town belongs to everybody. It's not belongs to one particular person or to any person. And I was here last 2 weeks, they were talking like false statement. That's not the truth. We, Somali, we say, the sunshine, nobody hold a hand. Uber bring good thing. People like it. The customer, they treat them bad, or the drivers who they treat bad is run away from them. They went to the Uber to get a better service. Better service, everybody, like the world changing every day. Now we can use the old equipment we use in telegraph right now. It's not working. You bring that idea, it's not working. This is a smart world and a smartphone, so we need it. So all our customers, they happy. I never seen any rude customer, but they happy. They say the service is like we happy, whatever we needed. We see where you're going, we see everything. So, and it's 2-3 minutes, we're picking up the customer. Plus, they saying, same fare, same, if it is a fare, so you charge me same money, I will pick up tomorrow, and in front of the hotel, I will sit, and people raising hand, I will pick up, and I will pay same amount of the money, you guys saying, but we give you all this opportunity. You don't see what we give you, what we let you, but it's not, it's our town. It's not your town, it's for everybody. So I want to tell them, if it is fair, the town, let's serve our people. It's our own town, our own people. We want to change. We don't want to stay with their own net. That's why we come out, and God bring Uber. One of our customers told me, Uber good for everything. That means they like it, 100%. There is not like 91. They are like a 50 or 25% less everything. They don't do good service. People need it. The second thing, our life changed right now. So whatever we need it is whatever we do it. The town will be changed, and I want to tell, it's not the time you're forcing by people choice. It's the time people follow their own choice and whatever they like. Here, there is a too many shop. There is a Dollar Tree, Rose. There is a too many shop. One expensive one is this. Let's serve our people. The one who has small money, let get a ride. The one who has a big money, let him get his own ride. It's not you saying, this is my way, this is my rule, this is only me. The world right now changing is with electronic and with internet service. So I want to say thank you for you guys, your vote. We need it. The change of Portland is your vote. If you don't do your vote today or tomorrow, our young generation, they don't have best future. They're going to stay like a telegraph. Tomorrow, the world will never change. We know in the world there is a people who never want to change in the world. Only they want their own interest. They don't look the interest for the society. Only they look in their pathway. So that's not the answer. The answer is look every side and let the people do their own choice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Guy Auker, A-U-K-E-R is my last name. First I want to say is I'm a driver for Uber, by the way, and what's nice as a writer, I like the convenience of just pulling out my app and getting a ride. I've used it numerous times in Portland. Number two, as a driver, I just want to say I like being a driver because I am a single father, and I like the extra income and the flexibility that as an Uber driver that gives me. And it's nice that anyone with a good driving record and a clean criminal history could do this. It's a really nice extra income. I do want to say that. The third thing I want to say is, first, Mayor Hills, you're in charge of the police bureau, correct?
Yes, correct.
One thing I'm curious to see is, once we started this, I believe on April 22nd, have we had less drunk driving crashes? And I'm just making sure I'm saying this right. Less drunk driving crashes and less deaths due to drunk driving. And also, I would like to know, have we had less drunk driving arrests? I'm very curious to see that number.
Good question. I don't know that answer at the moment, but my impression is that it might be better than it was at this time last year.
Okay, I will call your office to see if we get that information.
We can pull apart those numbers. We know how many traffic deaths and accidents there are.
Would love to know that answer.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks very much.
The next three are Blake Carson, Wynn Dwyer, Delilah Jones, and they'll be followed by David Holmquist, Lightning, and Peter Mordasher.
My name is Blake Carson. I own a radio cab. It seems that things are finally moving along, and that's almost good. But it's just the question is, what good is 4 more months going to do? It's not going to buy more time for a proper background check. It's not going to buy more time for them to prove proper insurance. It's not going to do anything but buy them time to have a tragedy in the streets of Portland. And that seems to be the only way that somebody is going to pay any attention. Watching the video from last week, it was brought up, the third-party audit, one of their drivers was removed. And the question should be is how many trips did he give before he was removed? You're right, no system is perfect, but you kind of hope that your system will catch a convicted murderer. There was one of those. Thank God that he wasn't here. It's kind of hard to sit and find new things to argue about because we were kind of specific on what our expectations were. You know, it's kind of hard to beat the dead horse, but sometimes the horse needs to get beat. We want a proper background check. One, that a man was convicted of exploitation of a 13-year-old girl gives 5,700 trips. You know, do you want your kid in that car if she's 18? That's the only way you can get an Uber ride is if you're 18. You know, it's TikTok. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Wendy Dyer with Green Transportation. I had plans to come here and say meaningful things to you all, but quite frankly, I'm sick of talking and you're sick of listening. I would have said those meaningful things anyway had I not found out about an hour before this meeting. We lost one of our taxi drivers last week, C.G. George, a Portland taxi company, who is maybe in her early 50s, passed away of a heart attack. Down in LA this weekend, they found a middle-aged woman slumped over in the back of her Uber vehicle, dead in a parking lot. People are literally dying to make 50 cents an hour with their cars, or $2.50 a mile for taxi drivers. You have a city here that is rapidly gentrifying. People of low income with low mobility are rapidly being displaced. There are so many people on the freeways trying to get to and from the menial jobs that they can work. Traffic is deplorable. Yeah, I know there's all the port union stuff too, but whatever the case, putting 10,000 other cars on the street isn't going to help anyone make a better living or get anywhere faster or do anything about the income equality and transportation equality gaps we have here between the rich and the poor and the inner city and the outer city. And so I'm just going to ask you, what can you do about this? Because I know you can't bring CE back, and you know whatever happened in LA is what happened in LA, and we like to pretend that those things will never happen here, but they will. I want you to do this. Figure out some sort of cap solution that works for both industries. It can be flexible on Uber's part, it can be firm on ours. I don't care. We all need to make a living wage job. And right now, Uber's a shiny new toy. Its gloss is already wearing back. They're coming back to us. Those drivers are going to be hurting just as bad as we are, like they are everywhere else in this nation. Put cameras in the cars. Make them accessible only by your police force. We need to protect our drivers and our passengers. We need car-based GPS tracking. We need visible branding, both for enforcement and for safety purposes on the TNC cars. It can be removable. There are such things as magnets. They use them elsewhere. They should use them here. We need insurance, full insurance, when those cars are on the road operating commercially, and that includes period one. We also need accidental occupational insurance like we cab drivers have. Uber drivers need those too. And last but not least, my personal pet peeve, the fire extinguishers. Dan Saltzman, please don't back down on that one. They got these little keychain fire extinguishers that they were giving out at the not ASE inspections. Make them at least have the keychain fire extinguishers. They're really important. If you do the research with your fire department, you'll realize that they're not a thing of the past, and if cab drivers have to have them, Uber drivers have to have them too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Welcome.
My name is Delilah Jones, and I am an owner at Radio Cab. I've been driving for 7 years. I do want to, like you were saying, Nick Fish, I want to make this an educational opportunity for you guys. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the permitting process, so I'm going to walk you through it pretty briefly. Basically, when you first want to be a taxi driver, you go to the City of Portland, I guess it's now the Bureau of Transportation dealing with it, and you show your face. You take a test. It's not very hard. I passed it in 8 minutes with 100%. Granted, I'm a native Portlander, so, but it, checks that you know your way around a little bit. And you get a background check, you get a driving record check, you pay them $100, you get your picture taken, and then you get this piece of plastic with a sticker on it. Every year you go back, you give them another $100. That $100 goes to pay for your background check and the staffing in this office. And your driving record check again, every year. So this year was different because of the short-term fix that you guys did, where I got a free sticker for 3 months or 4 months, and then I just got this one in the mail that's good for a year. It's good till May 2016, as it would have been. But I didn't have to pay for it, so that means the city is. The city is paying for my background check. My question is, I've read the recommendations of the task force, and they suggest that the permitting process should be shifted from the public to the private sector. And I don't really understand why. This is not an onerous, difficult thing to do. It takes about 45 minutes. It costs $100. I looked on Craigslist today. Uber is advertising that you can make $768 a week, which is a really arbitrary number. So 1 day of work for the entire year, right? And you're covered. And the fact is, at this office, you know that every person who has one of these pieces of plastic has been vetted by a very good background check. You know the background check. You know that the driver has done it. You can also, at that point, check that they have the proper commercial insurance, unless I would love to see what California has done is to require that from the point that the app is turned on to the point that the app is turned off, the Uber driver is covered primarily by Uber. But if you guys can't mandate that or the state can't mandate that, then this is an opportunity. The city can check that they have the proper commercial insurance and that nobody's going to fall through the cracks.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Is that the annual check? Is it your understanding that there's an annual background check?
Yes, there is. I actually called the PBOT today and verified that, in fact, they did do a background check. They will do background checks. New drivers at this point don't have to pay anything. So this is a great opportunity since we're not charging for the next 12 months, apparently. Any Uber driver in this room can go and get one of these and be covered and have no questions about it.
We haven't decided that yet.
Okay,
and we're
well-
also going to be working on the insurance this year. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank
now,
you.
last week there was mention of a $600 a year.
That's a separate issue. That's the plate that's on the back of my cab. I actually thought about bringing it in, but I didn't have the proper tools to remove it. So that is an annual renewal fee, $600 per plate. So I pay $300. My business partner, who drives during the day, pays $300.
What's that for?
That is supposedly it's for enforcement. Although I have never heard of. I mean, I've been driving for 7 years. Nobody's ever taken a look at this.
Does your car have to be re-inspected for that?
It does, yeah.
For that $600?
My car is inspected twice a year, once by the city and once by my company.
Part of that $600
it's
goes
a
to that.
mechanical inspection as well as making sure that I have my fire extinguisher, my first aid kit, my camera's in good working order, the meter is clicking at the right rate, all that sort of stuff.
And presumably, if you showed up and tried to take your cab out and it had a cracked windshield, your supervisor would
Yeah.
see that and say, no, you can't drive.
Yes. Yeah, that's happened.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
So if I could just beg your indulgence for a second. On the primary insurance question for commercial insurance, my understanding is there's consensus up here that it will be primary during all the periods. So I appreciate you, but that's my understanding. But the insurance issue, there's a wrinkle, and I'd like to just get your opinion on this. And someone gave me a chart because they know that I visualize things better than read things. So in period 1, TNCs offer less insurance than cabs. In periods 2 and 3, TNCs typically offer more commercial insurance. Well, just hear me out. And so whether you accept or reject the premise of the question, we're going to have to grapple with something nonetheless, which is, do we mandate parity for cabs and TNCs at a specific level for all purposes? And if so, what should the amount be? So what should the amount be?
I think a mandated minimum would be sufficient. Because radio cab exceeds the mandated minimum.
Right.
I don't know what those numbers are. I'm not an
But
insurance
I think
person.
what we're hearing is, cabs are at $500,000, and TNCs are below that in period 1, potentially above it. So one option is to mandate parity at the level of, say, $1 million for all purposes. I'm not asking you to bind everybody here, but do you have a view on that?
That seems sufficient to me. $1 million, that's what radio cab covers is $1 million at
I would
all
say there should be
periods.
parity. Whatever
parity,
it is,
absolutely.
it should apply equally to both.
Absolutely. And the argument that I heard last week was that during period 1, the Uber driver could be sitting in a coffee shop, watching
Apply
YouTube
that
videos.
distinction.
Well, and the fact is that then it's lowered risk and they'll get a lower premium. So what?
Yeah, I personally don't accept that distinction, so you've persuaded me of that. But so primary insurance, parity for all providers, and now the question is, what's the minimum?
$1 million seems reasonable to me, but I'm not,
Industry standard.
Yeah.
Industry standard. I think some have, with medical accounts, have 2 million, the cab companies. So, that's for specialized accounts, but across the board, 1 million.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And the next three, please, David Holmquist, Lightning, and Peter Mordasher. They'll be followed by Paul Lascanes, Mike McDermott, and Rochelle Menashe.
Afternoon.
Afternoon.
Okay, who'd like to be first?
Go ahead.
Okay, Lightning, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Watchdog X. In my opinion, the pilot program's over. I think Uber and Lyft should leave the city. And let me state why. The cab companies during this pilot program have lost a tremendous amount of profits. They've invested a lot of money over the years, many, many years, and they're still here. They're also losing a tremendous amount of money. The drivers also, the companies, valuations are plummeting immediately. If this pilot program has any meaning, we should stop Uber and Lyft at this time until they can come back to the table and say, how are we going to prevent this? We talk about shared economy. We want to come into the Portland market. No, you want to come in and do a hostile takeover on the Portland market. That's what you've done in other states. You have 150,000 drivers in India. You have 42,000 drivers in China. This is such a small market. You don't have to do a hostile takeover here. Think about what you're doing. This is a pilot program. Do not step on the traditional cab companies to gain competitive edge here. It doesn't boost your company all that much anyway. So I want you to think about how you're going to come into town and work with these cab companies, work with the drivers, and check where their incomes are. I want to know how much money you're going to invest into the city. I want to know what your future plans are on taking care of the people in this city and not just skimming off the top and taking the money back to San Francisco. So I want you to slow up a little bit and think about taking care of these cab company owners, taking care of the drivers, and don't come in here like a hostile takeover and try to take over this market, because Portland will stand behind their traditional cab companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Afternoon. Welcome.
I want to thank you and admire you first. I'm David Holmquist for your conduct as a council last Wednesday in listening to what was being said. I think much of it was uncivil, much of it was antisocial, and much of it was misinformation. So I admire your job. I couldn't put up with it myself, but you did, and thank you very much. I'm not going to read what I wrote for last week. I handed out copies of that. On the insurance issue, I'd like to just say that $1 million is enough, and I think what insurance should do is cover the apparent risk. When the risk is low, you shouldn't have to cover very much. In period 1 and period 2, the driver is alone in the car, and the real issue is the damage he might do to somebody else and the damage done to himself in his car. That's a lower level of risk than $1 million.
Sir, let's take your point first. And who do you represent?
Uber.
I didn't hear that.
I represent myself.
I understand, but
I drive for Uber.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on that when you introduced yourself. So if we mandate a minimum amount of insurance, why not let the marketplace determine what the premium is calibrated to the risk? You make a persuasive point that there may be less risk in period 1. So if we mandate what the minimum coverage is, presumably an insurance company is going to charge less for that amount of insurance because there's less risk. But let the marketplace sort that out, and I think isn't our job to set what the floor should be?
Yes, I believe that what you say is true. I wouldn't like to see the city council set insurance practices by levels of coverage. I do think that the period when we have 3 or 4, 5 or 6 people in our car is a tremendously higher risk, And I question whether $1 million is enough in today's healthcare situation, which is really high.
But again, just to be clear, sir,
Yes.
you have no quarrel with the council setting the minimums, and you and I agree that then the marketplace can figure out what is the appropriate cost for that insurance.
I do have some quarrel with your setting the minimums. This is not my area of specialty, but I would think that'd be something that Uber would want to work out, and the taxi companies as well, to protect their investment and their liability.
Again, I'm not here to argue the point, but our concern is not protecting Uber or the taxi companies. Our concern is protecting the public safety.
Mine too.
And if someone, God forbid, is hit by a vehicle, we want to make sure there's adequate coverage for that person. So that's the public interest for us, not the marginal impact of the cost on the operator.
I think Uber and taxi companies would agree with that. I also want to say something about caps. I don't see caps as necessary because in our way of doing this business, the drivers can quit anytime they want to quit. They can walk away from that day's work by signing off the wrap and going home. We don't have to put in 12 hours. That means that if there's not business on the streets available, if we're driving, or not driving, but if we're not driving people around, we're wasting our own resources. So what we do then is we go home, or we park, and we turn on our app and wait. We are not driving around, Ms. Fritz. We do not drive around aimlessly, thousands of cars in this city wasting resources. That would be really stupid. I'm not stupid. I don't believe the other drivers are either. So when there is not business, I'm saying, we quit.
So you're saying that you take somebody out to Lentz and you just stay there until there's another ride back from Lentz?
I'm saying when no. At times some people do, and they wait for a ride in Lentz. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But more often than not, we turn off our engine and wait for a ride to happen. It does happen that the core of Portland has more riders than elsewhere, mostly because most of our riders, 2/3 in my case, are from out of town. And they're here in the core doing business, staying in hotels, eating at the great restaurants. They're not in the suburbs. Yeah. So I just wanted to say it about caps. So we are self-limiting. If the business isn't there, we're not on the road. And we, like we've heard here, if someone's not making any money doing Uber, they're going to quit. They're going to quit the business. It's a self-limiting thing. So caps aren't necessary. I don't understand why there are caps on the number of cabs, other than that perhaps, this is only conjecture, the city fathers are saying, you people shouldn't be in cars, you should be in public transportation, on bikes, and on your feet. And I don't think that's a position that our city council should be taking, to determine how people get around. In fact, private for hire rides are a very strong business. People want it. What we should do is make sure that there's public safety and that there's quick service, good service, and you're about that task, I think, and that's good. But as for determining how people get around in the city, you're making options available, and that's good. The new Tillicum Crossing Bridge is a marvelous thing. No cars or trucks are involved, and that's a tremendous commitment from the city to public transportation and alternate means of getting around. That's a multi-million-dollar commitment. Very good. But neither taxis nor Uber will be using that bridge. We could use another one.
We hope so. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Peter Mordashev. I have been an owner-operator with Radio Cab Company since 2008 until June 1st, 2014. I'm currently a partner with Uber Technologies. And I have to say, after the last meeting, I'm kind of embarrassed with being with the company, with Radio Cab Company for so long, for hearing so many false points that those people brought up. I don't have time, like we all don't have time to go through all those false points right now. I just bring up one. Mr. Darren Campbell is a profound liar and a manipulator who was making a presentation here. He represents, well, I have to say he never represented for me, never will. He made a point that because Uber customers have cell phones and credit cards, then Uber take like skimming off the top and taking all the best fares. That's simply not true. Here's Tuesday, August the 25th, 22 trips, total $125.31. Divide 125.31 by 22 will be less than $6, but more than $5 per trip. Now, I'm not making a point that Uber driver is not making money or anything like that. I'm making a point that Darren Campbell is a liar and manipulator, or at the very least, he just doesn't know the facts, which I do not believe is true.
Sir, can I just make an observation?
Yeah.
We celebrate the First Amendment in this country, and we celebrate your right to come and, within boundaries, say whatever you want. I have yet, in my 7 years on the council, seen a debate made better and more helpful and more useful when we question people's motives or we use derogatory language. You may have a very strong view about the testimony of someone, but I just would encourage all of us, we don't need to disparage people we disagree with. If you have a disagreement, state the disagreement. We're adults. We're going to listen very carefully to you. But I think we should avoid name-calling and derogatory comments. It lowers everybody.
Yeah, so just tell us what you think we need to know.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, I just try to let you all know that some points that were brought up during the past meeting were just false. That's the only point I was trying to make, and I brought up an example. And also, I would like to say that I'm happy with being an Uber partner because being with Uber encourages a person to find a job, finally. Because all I heard from cab drivers last meeting and this meeting, money, 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 dollars and cents, give me more, give me more, give me more money. Social Security office on Yamhill. The Yamhill 16th over that way. You broke, go over there, don't go here. This is a business. Whoever provides a service for lower price wins. Period. End of story.
Thank you very much.
If I may finish my speech real fast, just
briefly,
10 seconds.
Briefly, Latin, please.
We need to understand when the traditional taxi companies and the drivers are hurting right now, the next people to take the biggest loss and to understand this will be public transportation, streetcar, TriMet Max, and buses. When Uber Pool becomes efficient, they'll cut into your profits, and I can assure you at that time, you're going to really look real close at this because that's public money that you're all responsible, and you better watch Uber and you better watch Lyft real fast because they're not here just to get 2,000 drivers here. That's small time for them. They're here to take over your public transportation, and the public has a right for you to defend us and protect our rights on that.
Okay,
Look
thank you.
around, state to state. They're no joke.
Thank you very much.
One very last thing, in 5 years from now, there will be self-driving cars all over the place. So what are we going to do? Sit here and be like, oh, poor driver's not making any income, let's not allow self-driving cars? Really? I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Next three, please. Paul Laskanis, Mike McDermott, Rochelle Menashe, followed by John Moran, Tony Seymour, Jean Thibert.
Good afternoon, welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Laskonis. I've been driving for Green Cab for over 13 years. And I'm here to talk specifically about the recommendation of no caps in the industry. So creating public policy that works can be an art form. You need to balance the needs and wants of all the stakeholders. You guys know this. I've been creating policy for Green Cab for over 12 years on their safety committee and disciplinary committee. Now, this idea of having no caps is, well, actually, I'm sorry, let me back up. So the balances of the needs and wants of all the stakeholders, when it's done right, you have growth. That's what I want to say. When it's not done right, you have other things. You've got things like destruction, you've got things like desperation, you've got things like crime. So the history of bad policies in the transportation industry in Portland, we only had 2 cab companies for a long time. Like the limo driver from Uber pointed out last week, after 30 years of being the only 2, they got lazy and their cabs weren't anything to be proud of. So then the city did a good thing. They allowed 3 more companies to enter the market, and all the companies had to ramp up their game in order to be competitive. Then we had another bad policy was introduced called the moratorium. For over 12 years, every year, Testify at Green Cab would submit new applications for new cabs, and they were denied. They were denied even for new wave vehicles. So the community cried out that there was a problem with the cab companies, not realizing that the cab companies had their hands tied. So then, after all of this time with no new cars, now we want to put thousands of new cars on the streets. I'm not against Uber being here. I'm just against the idea that everyone who has put a significant investment is going to have that investment pay off. I'm worried that it's going to destroy some of the companies. I'm worried it's going to destroy some lives. I'm worried that it's going to cause a gross imbalance that and so far all I can see is that it just serves the needs of the no cap policy, just serves the needs of Uber as a company. I think even as a Uber driver, I don't want 10,000 Uber drivers out there. Couple thousand, whatever the market will allow, that's great. But let's not just rush into no caps.
I need you to wrap up. That's good.
I have a
Good
lot
point.
more to say, but I'll leave it right there. Thank you very much.
That's very helpful. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here. My name is Mike McDermott. I'm a wheelchair van driver at Radio Cab Company. I'm on the board of directors at the cab company, and I'm the former board of directors liaison to the safety committee. I'd like to speak to a few topics. One of the primary ones is the level of capping we have in this city, or that we used to have. We used to have caps on our permits, and we would treasure those. We would try to appeal to the city to get more permits. People call them plates, and each cab is attached to a permit. That means they can pick up within the city of Portland. They've been inspected twice. My wheelchair van was inspected, had a surprise audit the other day by Will Martin up in Peabot. They called a cab to New Rose City, but New Rose City forwarded the call to us. I answered the call and showed up. So he audited my vehicle. The interesting thing is we bring in Uber to help alleviate all of the complaints we get from midnight travelers who coming home from bars, going home late at night from work, and we can't do it because we don't have enough cars out. So what does the city do? The city says, well, I'm sorry, there's enough permits. If we allow more permits to go out, it might create a monopoly, and we don't want to do that. So they allow Uber in. The city allowed Uber in to help alleviate that, even though this could have been fixed in the status quo. And it was never fixed. It was never even addressed. We tried to get more permits, and we couldn't do it. I'm on the board of directors. I know about the conversations we have. I know what we try to do, and I know we've tried to approach the city about it. We allowed other cab companies in because we want to make sure that people are fairly represented. We still do many more trips than our closest competitors combined. Our average driver is driving 50,000 to 60,000 miles per year per shift on their vehicle. Not per shift, but over the year. And we're not, the other cab companies can't do it because they don't have the reputation that we have. We have great managers who take care of the lease drivers, and we make sure that the lease drivers comply with our safety standards. We make sure they comply with the city's state safety standards, Mayor. And Uber is, now we're just allowing a bunch of amateurs on the road. They've already hit our vehicles. I've already seen the damage they're doing. I know the amounts of damage they're doing. And I do agree with you, Mr. Fish. There needs to be parity. $1 million limit on all levels. It needs to happen. Whether or not they say that they're going to sit under a shady tree or over at a coffee shop, that's not true, because they're going to be driving somewhere.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Rochelle Menashe, and I have been a radio cab driver for 4 years. I started driving cab because I am partially handicapped, and this is pretty much the only thing I've been able to do as to make a living. I do collect medical and some minimal amount of disability. I have a cap on the amount of money that I'm allowed to make, and otherwise I will lose my benefits. So since Uber and Lyft have, this pilot program has started, I find myself having to work at least 2 to 3 times harder and longer hours than I was before. Pretty soon I'm not going to be able to afford my rent, and I'm sure there's a lot of other drivers in the same boat. As a cab driver, I take great pride in, I call this my career choice. There's many years of people putting into this industry, and to allow TNCs to come in and operate in those, like we work very, very hard all week long in order to be able to reap the rewards of high volume peak hours, the weekends, rush hour. And now that, it seems like most of the testimony I heard last week was from Uber and Lyft drivers claiming that they only work part-time and during those peak hours. So they're taking our bread and butter away. Those are the days, those are the times that I know I can count on making more than minimum wage. This pilot program has already been, accepted. Mayor Hales, Steve Novick, we know you met behind closed doors with Uber lobbyist Mark Wiener. And even though it seems like it's a done deal, I urge the rest of you to please put a stop to this. I had a customer the other day ask me if I do this as a hobby or as my job, and that just really hit home with me. You open the door, you can close it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you all. Pick the next.
And the next 3, John Moran, Tony Seymour, Jeanette Thibert, followed by John Holgate and Kadir Wako.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hello, I'd like to thank the council members for the opportunity to speak today. My name is John Moran, and I'm a proud driver for the local rideshare company, Radio Cab. I like to use the term rideshare company because the TNCs like to use it, even though it's clearly a misnomer. There is no sharing in the TNC's rideshare model. It's hiring a driver and a vehicle to take you where you're going, not sharing a ride where they happen to be going. The Bureau of Transportation doesn't even believe this lie, so they have coined the term transportation network companies. But I digress. I'm here to make the point of carrying capacity. This term is used by biologists and economists alike. It is defined as the maximum equilibrium number of organisms a particular species can be supported indefinitely by a given environment. Basically, if there is space and resources, those organisms will grow and expand until they have reached this number. One thing to note is that when this number is surpassed, times of famine and die-off ensue. I'd like you to keep this point in mind and come back to this. For years, the Bureau of Transportation has kept the number of permitted taxis lower than the amount the taxi companies were asking for. This had the side effect of slower wait times for taxi customers, but what it did was ensure the taxi drivers themselves had a livable wage. It also limited the number of vehicles on the road. As Portland grows, we are experiencing more traffic. If you haven't driven in it yourself, please trust me, I am out there every day. I bring these 2 points up because back in February, the Private to Hire Board of Review finally approved more taxi permits. 242 were to be given out, an increase the Oregonian reported as 63% more than was given out than was even on the road at the time. It takes a while to purchase, paint, and outfit cars with meters, cameras, dispatching system, and taxi light. So the decrease in wait time for customers wasn't immediate. As these cabs were coming online, the pool of taxis grew by 63%, and the Innovation Task Force approved the TNCs to work in Portland, which then just increased the number of, it flooded the market. As a taxi company, we are still only permitted a maximum number of vehicles on the road, and the TNCs are allowed unlimited number of taxis. Don't let them say they are not taxis. The result of these two incidents has been a famine to all private-to-hire drivers citywide. We haven't just hit carrying capacity, we have blown over the number. In January of 2012, then Mayor Sam Abs directed City of Portland Revenue Bureau to complete a comprehensive review of the economic and working conditions of taxi drivers. The review found that the effective hourly income of Portland taxi drivers is $6.22. You're chopping up living wage jobs for part-time supplemental income jobs. If that report was done today, that income would have dropped, it would have decreased. Radio Cab isn't afraid of competition. We have been a proud staple of Portland for 75 years. Uber and Lyft are just competitions, but what you're allowing them to have is the upper hand in this competition, which is why I ask that you see what the result in the customer wait times is with just the 63% increase by saying no to TNCs. So you can get an idea of what that decrease in wait times is without being allowed decrease in wait times is without it just being allowed for the TMCs to take credit for it. Their numbers on wait times are skewed anyways. Cabs pick up further out in the suburbs. The times it takes to get out there is longer. Whereas the numbers shown by the task force show that TNCs rarely go out to the suburb.
I need you to try to wrap up quickly. I know you've got a little bit
I will
left.
do so. I know that capping the number on TNCs on the road isn't new to Uber. They have successfully bullied New York into stepping back on that regulation, which is why if it's going to be done, it should be done now, because they won't allow it later. If not to help private-to-hire drivers keep a livable wage, please do it to help us decrease traffic. The City Council is here to make Portland better. Let your legacy be that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Welcome.
My name's John Moran, and I'm an Uber driver, full-time. I drive between 40 and 50 hours a week. And I think one of the main topics that I would like to bring up is what I hear every day from my passengers, the dislike of cab companies. They're sick to death of unreliable service. They love Uber. They use it other places. Like it's been said here before, the majority, I'd say probably a good 2/3 of my passengers are from out of town. They're tourists and business people. I've had business people tell me that they did not like coming to Portland because Uber was not here. They were so dissatisfied with the service. I had one gentleman actually tell me that he refused to come to Portland. He sent his other people because he was so frustrated with the taxi services. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober almost 10 years. And, you know, I'm not proud to say that I'm sure on many occasions I drank and drove. I think if Uber was around at that time, I would have used it a lot more. I really think that there's so many more people that are getting out of their cars, deciding not to drive to the bar because there is a reliable service that they can call. They can see immediately when it's coming. When they call a cab, many of the time the cab doesn't turn up. When the cab turns up, they come out and there's someone else getting into their cab. You know, so it's a very, very reliable service. And I would really applaud you to actually talk to the people that actually use the service, not just the cab companies, not just the Uber drivers or the Lyft drivers, the actual people that use the service. They love it. They absolutely love it. And so I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Tony Seymour, and I am a radio cab owner, have been for 14 years. Thanks very much for your participation and your willingness to listen to some of the interesting comments that you've been getting. One thing that I would like to reiterate that I think has been forgotten in this whole thing, and that is that when this was all put together, when the transportation plan for Portland was put together, the taxi cab was the lowest common denominator of it. In other words, with taxi cabs, we can build a system, and then we'll have buses, and we'll have trolley cars, and we'll have whatever's above that to move a large amount of people once upon a time. But I got to tell you that when it stops, when public transportation stops, who do you call? It's not the Ghostbusters, it's the cabs. And we're there all night because we're required to be there 24 hours a day. Now, is there a lot of business from 3 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock in the morning? No, there isn't. But do we get to go home, as one of the Uber drivers suggested was probably his idea about what he should be doing when he's not moving? If I were moving all the time, I could have retired years ago. The truth is that a good share of the time, I'm sitting and I'm waiting for work. This reminds me of a little story that I'll bore you with for a second. There's a joke about a pig and a chicken about how they participate in breakfast. And the truth is that the chicken is a participant in breakfast and the pig is committed. You guys are the chicken, we're the pig. And I don't mind doing that. I love what I do. But the truth is, we are the ones that are committed to doing the work, and we have been. And we've been doing the city's work all this time. Letting you have a public transportation system. Can you imagine running your public transportation system all night long? No, because you've been asked to do it and you've said no consistently. TriMet has said no, and the city council has probably, pushed that along. I actually had a lot more things that I wanted to say, but basically what I want you to know is that I think it's important to remember that the human factor here is really important. The cab drivers and their companies have been taking care of the people who can't take care of themselves in Portland for a long time. This gentleman right here spoke of being taking care of businessmen and tourists. Those are the people that cab drivers love to have because generally they're going someplace and they don't mind spending a little money. But what about your mom that's at the grocery store and wants somebody to come pick her up and take her groceries into the house for her? I guarantee that Uber drivers will not be signing up for that one. But the trick is for us that we're required to do those things and we don't mind. We don't mind doing it at all. But the trick is if you take away the cream of the crop, we've got nothing left. And what you're going to do is put a lot of people out of business because they can't afford to continue to be only doing the crappy jobs. I know that all of the cab drivers that I know are voters. And the people that we carry in our cabs are voters. And one of the things that seems like right now, you guys are stuck in a place where you could either stop this thing and start over again, or at least add some of the information and comments that you've received that will make it work, because we're not asking for you to throw them out, or at least I'm not. I think ultimately we're going to have to face the fact that this is something that's coming in the 21st century. What's happened is you guys have come off at warp speed to make this thing happen. One of our city councilmen was on the phone with them screaming at them when they told him, you can't come to our city and do that. And what's going on now? Please come to our city, we want you here. There's something kind of missing about that. I feel sort of like the little kid that told the empress that he was naked in the parade. Because it's like, here we have this thing where everybody's saying, oh, this is going to be so wonderful. And the truth is, it's not that wonderful. It needs to be brought into our system, our Portland cab industry layout, and the way that it's been put together by the city needs to be brought in gently, not all at once, not helter-skelter. That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
The next three I have are John Holgate, Kadir Wako, and Alem Tesfaye, and Jeanette. I did call your name. Somebody else came up.
We'll get you up.
Have a seat. Jeanette, you'll be next.
Go ahead. We'll get you up in the next. We'll get you up in the next round.
No, and then Jeanette and Kirk Foster will be after these gentlemen.
Okay. Welcome.
Yes, I'm John Holgate. I have been driving with Uber since November last year when we were operating out in the suburbs. I live in southeast Portland. I'm one of these Uber drivers who drive during those hours from past 12 midnight, sometimes as late as 7 in the morning. And I know just from having met with some of my other drivers at the airport and other locations that we do have people out there working in those hours and taking some of those difficult trips that the prior gentleman was talking about. So, but that's not really what I came to talk about so much as I have to ask a question. Why are we so intent on capping the number of drivers? The way I'm seeing, what I've been hearing from coming to these meetings is that there's two main reasons for setting caps. And the first one is congestion. The other one is trying to ensure that drivers make a living. And I want to challenge those notions. For every now, let's start with congestion. For every adult driving age passenger in an automobile, right, or riding in an Uber or a taxi, you're eliminating one more car off the road. In addition to that, the cars that are out there moving people around are getting full utilization out of those cars, and they are taking up less parking spaces around the city. So that's eliminating another form of congestion. Another concern had to do with pollution and exhaust emissions and everything. Well, Uber drivers, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for ride shares, the Ubers and Lyft people. A lot of us are in this business for ourselves, and we have a financial incentive to drive cars that are fuel efficient. A lot of us have Priuses. I own a Prius. Some people own Leafs or other fully electric automobiles. Now the other thing I wanted to mention is that when you're talking about ensuring that the drivers that are out there can make a living, is it really the city's job to ensure that people can make a living? I thought in order to make a living, you have to be able to provide a service that people value and that people are willing to pay for that service. That's what determines whether or not you make a living. But if the city is setting things up in such a way that you limit the number of people out there doing that job so that all of them can make a living at it, then we're kind of moving beyond what should be a business operation to a de facto welfare program. And I like to suggest that if you're looking at capping licenses for people to drive in the city, how are you going to cap what the demand is out there for the people? Because when you do that, you're going to constrain the people who actually need a ride. We're going to go back to having longer wait times and even people not getting rides. Now, it may not happen right away after you pass some sort of capping scheme, but over time, as things change, we're going to be right back where we started from, and who knows, maybe there'll be another disruptive technology to come in and kind of change the playing field like it's happened before. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Kadir Wako. I'm the general manager of Union Cab Cooperative. I have been in taxi industry since 1998 when I first started as a cab driver. Union Cab was established in 2013 after working diligently for 3 years to be issued 50 permits. Union Cab is a company affiliated with CWA, AFL-CIO, and Job with Justice. We followed the rules. We followed the process, and we did it right. We chose the taxi industry for our livelihood so that we may support our families and provide our children with the choice they will need to be successful. Deregulation. The removal of cabs on permit will saturate the market and dilute the earning potential of all drivers, taxi and TNC alike. This will have a grave consequence on many families of drivers who are already limited in their ability to earn a living wage. The taxi industry, however, has a cabs because of its unique nature, and it is part of public utility system. Balancing on the supply and demand of the taxi allows system to operate sustainable and allows driver to make a living wage. A cabs ensure the taxi company can deliver on the CD mandate service requirement. CAB is not monopoly. It is simply a monitoring system administration can use. If all caps are removed on the number of taxis in the TNC that are serving the market, the supply floodgate will open. Yet the underlying demand will remain unchanged as we have witnessed. The result race to the bottom with no one making a reasonable income and the fallout of our industry to most dedicated drivers. If the drivers are no longer able to earn an income, their option for family survival will be extremely limited. Drivers and their family could quickly become homeless and consequently depend upon welfare. The burden will then fall on the CD and ultimately the taxpayer. Under your leadership, Mayor Hills, taxi drivers and the small cab company are suffering from the wrong regulation taken by your office. In 2012, CD of Portland study showed that taxi drivers barely make a living wage based on hours. There is no change for the drivers except flooding the city with 1,000 of vehicles. Increasing the number of permits does not increase the driver's income. Mayor Hills, as the son of cab driver, please remember the time away from the home that your father committed daily driving. Fees. Union Cab fees pays those permit fees by collecting from cab owners of the company. 1,000 company annual fee, 600 vehicle annual fee per vehicle, and $100 driver annual fee. The application permit fee must be uniformly applied to all for hire transportation companies, including technology taxi company or TNC. Technology taxi company must carry adequate commercial insurance like any other taxi company. Most importantly, in the upcoming months, there will be another 250 cabs added to the Portland metro area. We ask the City Council to authorize more cab stands in the following areas: all major hotels and motels in Portland metro area, shopping center like Safeway, Fred Meyer, Winkos, and the Walgreens, and all Northwest Portland area per district restaurant and bars. By adding those cab stands, the City of Portland will avoid congestion that already highly congested by Uber drivers in those already overpopulated areas. We highly urge the City Council to establish a level playing field and carefully consider the impact on drivers when determining the right balance between increasing supply and preserving family wage. Thank you.
Thank you. Afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Tasfai. I think most of you know me. And the testimony I'm giving is submitted already to all of you. I am lucky. 40 years ago, I was politically prisoner in Ethiopia because I opposed the country's dictatorship. I was tortured daily. I just wanted to die at the time. But somehow, I escaped with my life. Over time, I got married, moved to Portland, and raised a family of 4 children. I was able to achieve the American dream thanks to the goodness of the city of Portland, one of you, Mayor Charlie Hills. I was able to, be able to achieve the city of Portland. This where I earned the opportunity to be a cab driver, then co-founder of Green Transportation. Since being founded in 1997, our company, which operates sedan taxis, shuttles, medical, and web transportation, had been doing very well. Over the years, we have taken a keen pride in operating a well-run business with a little to no debt. We provided family wage income until April. Applied for additional permit 2 years ago and followed all the procedures the city established, including showing the demand for more taxis. After going through all the steps in good faith, I was awarded new permits 2 months before the pilot project. Part of getting these new permits was the requirement that I purchase web vehicles, which I did right away. This year, I paid 18,450 permits to 82 permits. Then along comes an Uber without going through any procedure spelled out the city code. They were suddenly granted unlimited ability to put an unlimited number of taxis on the road with no real requirements for wheelchair accessible vehicles and no requirement to the same level of insurance that branded taxi companies are required to provide. And Uber only paid $20,000 permit fee for its unlimited number of vehicles. Uber and Lyft have approximately 3,200 vehicles on the streets of Portland. If they paid the same permit fee that the branded taxi companies in Portland paid, combined, they would owe the city of Portland almost $2 million. None of this is fair. Why and how did this happen? It is because Uber bullied the city into approving an opportunity that was denied me for years. Like the other branded taxi companies in Portland, Green Transportation is a small business. We provided web services, we give 24/7 coverage to all areas of the city, and we pay in commercial insurance. Many of the branded taxi drivers in the city are immigrants, just like me. The same stories and life experience similar to mine. You have given a $50 billion California-based company an advantage over us. Then, when the trial period began, you said Portland existing branded taxi companies could have an unlimited number of cars too. After spending $500,000 on new wheelchair vehicles, I could not afford to buy another vehicle. Portland city leaders, I thought, had rewarded my company for providing exceptional service, but I was wrong. You have instead helped to drive my business into a state of disrepair. I have several web vehicles that are not being driven now because many drivers cannot sustain their family by driving them. They say they cannot afford to serve personnel with disabilities because those are not the most profitable. How is this that solves the web problem here in Portland? It's not. It has just created a new problem. Green transportation has spiraled into debt. What is the message this sends to Portland-grown businesses if an out-of-state company come here, ignore all the rules, and operate as it pleases, forcing local companies out of business? The city of Portland has failed miserably on 4 of the 8 guidelines principles of the so-called pilot project. The current regulations have not provided an environment that promotes for fair competition.
Yes, I want you to wrap up soon.
Yes, the current regulations are given Uber and Lyft competitive advantage, excluding web services. Taxi drivers are no longer able to make living wages. And there is not an effective enforcement that is ensuring that an Uber and Lyft are following the same regulation that have put in place. If only you had figured out a way to honor those of us who have invested everything into our company, a cap on the number of branded and unbranded taxis would have helped. But in the end, I still feel lucky. I survived prison and daily torture by a very corrupt government. I can survive this. But green transportation may not survive. We have followed your rules. If we fail, it is on you. Can I say something just in addition? We have followed the insurance, the web, the permitting processes, and the background check. We've done everything we can do, but on the back of us, the billion-dollar companies have come and push us into the corner. Maybe we are going to go out of business. But what we need is a level playing field so that
we're not, one thing that everybody is trying to say is we are not asking Uber to get out. We're asking to have the same level field, insurance, permitting. Why do we think that they do not want to use the city of Portland for permitting? Because if we're asking the number of vehicles, if they are paying for the number of vehicles, they will know. If they are paying for the number of drivers, they will know. If they are paying for the company, they will know. Everything will be known if it goes through the city of Portland. It has to go, it has to be done that way. That's what we have done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I just want to add, there is a way to naturally cap the drivers in this area, and that is through the market. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Others that we have signed up?
Okay, Jeanette and Kirk. If you'll come up.
Come on up.
Kurt Foster.
What's this? This is just people that.
Go ahead.
The other gentleman wants to testify?
So actually, at the end of the last hearing, there was a procedural issue with the council clerk not being able to take additional sign-ins, even though at the end of every hearing, we always say, does anybody else want to testify? So I took the list of the 4 names of the folks
Four more names. Okay,
who were here last week.
Yeah, we'll certainly take those folks. So please go ahead.
Jeanette Thiebert. Thank you. Yes, I drive with Radio Cab. Mayor Hales, Commissioner Novick, Commissioner Salzman. It's become clear over time that many of you might want to leave a lasting legacy. That might be important. The 120-day extension to this current issue might be quite the gift for that opportunity. So while many things have come to light recently that may not be part of the legacy that you'd like remembered, this is your golden opportunity. We missed an opportunity to, in the beginning, do data gathering before we implemented the pilot project, okay? But I want you to do a couple things and ask yourself, make your decision-making based on what is best for all of the people of Portland. And I said people, not corporations. Okay? It's become very clear that, oh, let me back up. Most everyone here has a spouse, and some of us have children. So when you're in discussion and decision-making, I want you to remember what it's like to live in a house with teenagers, because you might be experiencing deja vu. When this began, the TNCs, Uber and Lyft, Uber in particular, easily, they approached the city, they easily could have done business in Portland a year and a half ago, okay? It would have caused a slight mindset shift. They chose not to. What I'm asking you to do is practice restraint, practice discipline, and occasionally say no. When they could easily provide full coverage insurance, they choose not to. They could easily put fire extinguishers in all their cars. They're resistant. They could easily provide coverage 24 hours a day in all the neighborhoods of the city for people in wheelchairs. They have not chosen to go far enough to find solutions. They want to do the chores that are easy, the ones that they like. They don't want to do the work, okay? And they don't want to be held accountable, to be responsible. Nobody has to do business in this city. No one. We get to, it is a privilege, and with that comes responsibility. If your teenager came to you and said, Mom, Dad, I'm 17, House rules, they shouldn't apply to me. I'm almost an adult. Would you agree? Why did Uber get to come here and not abide by the rules? If your teenager came to you and said, wow, I'm almost an adult, I'd like to set my own allowance. We've allowed Uber and Lyft to set their own wages. And then, oh, because they do it, now everyone else gets to, okay? We don't treat teenagers this way. Why do we allow corporations to act like teenagers?
Thank you.
Leave a legacy your children would be proud of.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Welcome.
My name's Kirk Foster with Wapato Shores Transport, and Testify said most of what I had to say, so I'll jump right to the end of what I said. Summarize first out, I think everything needs to be just looked at from a question of equity or equality. We have a lot of, like Testify's, well-run cab companies that are perfectly capable of competing on a level playing field, and that's what it has to be, is simple equality all the way through. There should be no separate rules for TNCs or insurance company or taxi companies. They should have the same insurance requirements, same signage, same background checks, it should be all the same across the board. If it's all the same across the board, the TNCs will suffer a little more, and the taxi companies will have an equal playing field, and then whoever's best will come out on top in the end. Simple as that. There should be no special rules for either group, and it should be the same. I'll just leave, and like I said, Testify said everything pretty much else on that subject I want to say. I want to touch on the WAVE funding thing, because that's something I'm more specially involved in. The reason that there hasn't been equality for WAVE transport in this city, or equal access or equity, or however you want to phrase it, for all these years, is one simple thing, and it's cost, both cost of service and opportunity cost. It takes roughly 50% longer to do a WAVE ride than an ambulatory ride, because the driver has to deploy the lift, assist the person on a lift, get them into the van, secure the wheelchair, help them with the auxiliary seat belts, stow the lift, do the ride, and then repeat everything on the back end. If a driver is struggling to survive, why would they take a WAVE ride when they can do 2 ambulatory rides at the same time and double their revenue, given the necessity of keeping equity of cost to the passenger? So that is the reason the problem has been there in the city. It's always been the reason, and it's always going to be the reason until the problem is solved. The only way, and so I'm just going to bring this back around to that specifically, because that problem existed before, and regardless of what you do with the TNCs, this needs to be addressed, and this is a good opportunity to address it now and not kick the can down the road again. The idea of the funding that the task force presented, the idea of reimbursing is I think it's a good idea. I think it's the only way that it's going to work. It's ridiculous to have anybody suggest that we fund somebody's purchase of equipment or fund a startup business to provide WAVE service, a startup business that has not proven they can do it. If the city collects funds and reimburses every driver or owner or cab company or TNC or anybody for that matter that provides WAVE service after the fact, the city will both have all the data it needs, because the WAVE passenger's name will be known and they can be surveyed to check for quality of service. The operator or whoever they may be can be reimbursed for the additional cost. A WAVE ride is roughly 275% of the cost of an existing ride. And if every driver of any organizational structure goes ahead and does a WAVE ride, collects the same fee from that passenger they would collect from any other passenger, and then the city reimburses them the difference in cost, then there will be no disincentive, no lost opportunity cost for a driver to choose an ambulatory ride over a WAVE ride, and there will be no cost reason to choose an ambulatory ride over a WAVE ride. So the entire problem will be eliminated if we can have after-the-fact reimbursement for WAVE rides citywide. And that's the nut of what I want to say.
Could you give me that number again as to how much more expensive a WAVE ride is?
Approximately 275%.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Yes. My name is Ombeya Makano, and I drive for Uber. And actually, I'm just going to start by quoting some of my passengers. I will start by a gentleman from Bend who was so mad that Portland couldn't allow Uber to come to Portland. And you know what he said? He said it's a very stupid idea to fight the technology. Very stupid idea to fight progress. Shouldn't be. Not here and nowhere in the world, because that's just keeping human intellect from developing. We shouldn't be fighting progress, and we shouldn't be fighting technology. If the other one said Soviet Union was collapsed, just because they failed to keep up with the technology. The other one said, Roman Empire, when they failed to fight Christianity, what did they do? They joined them. If you can't fight them, you join them. As easy as that. We used to have in Portland, we used to have a Washington Mutual. We used to have Montgomery Ward here. Where are they? And they're all older than a Radio Cab and so on. But they went out of business. Why? Because they couldn't keep up with progress.
Technology.
If you can't keep up with the progress, you have to go. As simple as that. Is another thing when, maybe we can request just the city council to try to make some regulations here. Uber doesn't disagree with that. But their intention is not really regulations. Their intention is to keep Uber out of business. I had a passenger who was visiting the Northwest from, I don't know, from Miami or something, and he was in Seattle. He only had one extra day, and he wanted to visit either Portland or Vancouver. He went online. He checked, he saw in Vancouver there is no Uber. But in Portland there was Uber. So his choice was easy. He came to Portland and he got me. He told me, my friend, I only have 4 hours. Show me all the landmark of Portland. I showed him around, starting by Pioneer Square. I took him to Washington Park. I took him to Blazers Stadium. I took him even to Multnomah Falls. In just 4 hours, he left $166 here in Portland. What's wrong with that?
Great, thank you.
That's my question.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. So we do have some more folks, because you've completed your list, right? And we have these folks who signed up at the end of the hearing. So I'll call them Jean Nations, Linda Robb, and Frank Choto, if you're here, or Nicola Batrachuk. Okay, come on up, please. Any of those 4 folks that are here, come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Lord Mayor, commissioners, and the citizens of Portland. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to appear before you.
Oh, put your name in the record, please, Frank.
My name is Frank Choto. I've been around. I started driving back in 1986 after completing college here in Portland. Some things need to be said. The first is, and it comes as news that might upset, but this is a new day and a new age and a new technology and a new industry that is upon us, manifesting itself as the TNC. And from all indications, it is here to stay, not just in the city of Portland, but throughout the world. They're in my hometown where I grew up back in Africa, and they're here. Now, but we have citizens who have expectations and who vote, and who are hopeful that these new technologies will go away, but they will not. And we therefore need to be honest with them and raise our level of discussion here by telling them that there is the possibility that these companies are not going away. I've joined them comfortably. I'm not scared of them. And make them understand that this is the new playing field. These companies are here. And pose the question, given the continued presence of these companies amidst us and doing what they do, how do you as taxi companies then move forward and manage to survive and perhaps even thrive? It's not an easy question, but it is a question that needs to be asked so as not to sit here and give them the false hope that these discussions are going to end in these companies exiting. I don't see it. But since my time is running out, so let me just touch on insurance because that's a big thing. And I suspect from listening to the testimony that you're not getting everything you need to be told about insurance. Insurance can destroy a company in the blink of an eye. And that's why it is so hard. Now, how have the taxis dealt with it? They're not telling you everything, and I'm not blaming them for not telling you everything. Some of these are seen as trade secrets, some of these are seen as irrelevant, but you need to know this, that most taxi companies have something called an accident fund. It is a fund quite outside of insurance, and which is used to cover accidents. So they never use their policy to cover these things. Because when you use your policy to cover your accidents, your rate goes up, and it will destroy you. It almost destroyed me. Now, I briefly suggested about 6 months ago that insurance need not all be in the public sector, in the private sector. That perhaps it is time to approach the insurance commissioner down in Salem and raise with them the possibility of insurance through the public sector. Because there was a referendum here about 15 years ago, and which authorized that, and which the construction industry has taken advantage of, because it is an expense. One more thing, and then I'll be done. Parking for these cars is an issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe a monthly pass so they can park. I'm tired of quarters being slipped into the machines. A monthly pass would be nice. And also, no one ever raised the questions, all these people who drive, what toilets do they use? And if they're tired, where do they go? And if they have a flat tire on a Sunday night, who fixes that? And we do have some good ideas. The scope of my remarks here obviously cannot delve into that. You have other things to do. But if some of us who are interested in these issues would be given an opportunity, not in a forum like this where we can't really get into them in depth, but we've thought about them for years and we have some good ideas, it would be nice to meet with your staff to chart out some of these things. Lastly, the people testifying here are the people who always testify here, and they represent a minority of the driving community. Sometimes you need to go over there to where the drivers are to get testimony over there. There are places where they congregate, like at the backfield at the airport, hundreds of them. And then you will get a different perspective from the pure driver.
Thank you.
Okay? Not the owner who also controls a few permits on the side and has a vested interest in other than just pure driving. Thank you.
Hello.
Give you the
I'm
chance.
that driver.
Okay, we're going to give you the chance to have the last word. Go ahead.
I'm really sorry.
Just give us your name.
Commissioners, my name is Babak Talai, and I know you've all seen me. Unfortunately, I'm very passionate, and as you can tell, I'm hardly able to breathe right now. So I'd like to throw some words up. My words are this: sophistry, bullying, and there's one more, but I just can't get it out right now. This is essentially what Uber has been doing. Sophistry. The gentleman sat there, not this gentleman, but the other gentleman, and laughed while my sister was testifying in this space. And you know, the body language of that other gentleman who
Okay, but
sitting
please,
right
please
there.
tell us your
Right.
points.
What I want to say is, I remember when Commissioner Novick asked, you know, we let Walmart in here and nothing happened. You know, it's still making me cry every day over that question that the gentleman put up. I remember Commissioner Fritz, what a lovely question that was to Uber. How much insurance have you got? And the reply was enough. Sir, I have a question for you. Have been, you know, through different publication have been said that you and Uber seem to share an advisor. Sir, I don't really have any idea of what you stand for, but Commissioner Fish has really put some very smart, intelligent questions on the table. What I wish to say is I'm not against the drivers that drive for these other companies. these multinational companies, by the way. They're not the mom and pop, whatever operation that they make out. When they put, my brother Abdul, whoever it was, Abdi, last time he was talking about how he was buying a home when we first started. But anyways, if you guys had a dispatch, maybe you could go to your dispatch and ask these very intelligent questions. I go to that beautiful lady in that white hair and ask her questions every day. I've been driving for Radio Cab for 3 years now. There are questions. There are lots of questions. But when you have just a smartphone and that's all that keeps you from whatever, the outer darkness, God help you. All I got to say is Walmart has managed to skim a lot of profits out of this small little city and walked off. I give a ride to 2 different schizophrenic, lovely ladies in Lake Oswego, and they speak and have conversations all the time in the back of my cab, and I continually pick them up and drive them where they gotta go. I get, if you want to know how many wheelchairs fit into a backup Prius, ask me. I can tell you. There's 2 very comfortably, and then 2 passengers can also ride. I can get 1 bicycle into a Prius and 2 passengers, God forgive me, in the front seat. These are the things that I've had to find out, and then through my command structure, I vet my questions and I get them answered.
Thank you.
We are a very self-sufficient company, but right now we have our hands tied behind our back because, as you all understand, Uber does not pay for the privilege of driving here. I don't know why they're here, through the grace of God or otherwise. It's a mystery. But I'm really sorry.
No, thank you
I know
very
I
much.
look like Vin Diesel, but brothers, if you put you on the sides of your cars, you will see that this radio cabbie will come and give you a hug. I am Woody Allen, and I'm not here to eat anybody's lunch. I'm just here to do what's right. I am a...
Thank you very much.
The only way I can describe me is that, I'm here, I'm queer, and get used to it. Because I have way too many labels. I got disabled vet, I got immigrant, I got...
Thank you so much.
Sorry about that.
Thank you both.
Okay.
Thank you so
very
much, all of you.
Okay, we appreciate you too. I think that was a good way to end this this public testimony. I'm serious. Thank you very much. Now I know we want to bring staff up. I know there are a number of questions. So why don't we do that? Commissioner, bring PBOT staff up. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, Mayor, I'm wondering if we've got, for the first time, I think, a representative of the insurance industry
Yeah,
here.
I know
Ken
you want-
Bryan,
you
who
have
made a-
him
who made a
here.
special trip.
Yeah.
And I've actually got a couple of questions from him, and I think we should take advantage of having him here
I think
because we've
that'd
had
be
a lot
very
of
helpful.
discussion about insurance with
Yep.
anybody from the industry here
It'd be
before.
very helpful. We could bring up experts and resource people, including Mr. Bryan. That'd be, I think, quite helpful. So,
Steve, it would be, could I raise just a procedural question? Because since we're now in the end game here, for at least for today's hearing, can I just get a sense of how you want to handle our discussion? So, for example, we have a report that we can accept. That's just as I said earlier, ministerial function. We can accept it. Typically, we do not modify a report. A report speaks for itself. We can accept or reject recommendations, but we're not apparently going to be doing the next level of regulation for a while. But there are specific things in the testimony that I think one or more of us want to address. What is your preferred approach for us to do that? It doesn't quite feel like we'd be. It doesn't quite feel like we would amend a report because the report speaks for itself. But to the extent we have, if there's a consensus on the council around any of the issues that have been raised and a desire to have staff come back with specific language and recommendations, how do you want us to handle that?
Well, as far as accepting the report, all that matters to me is that we actually have a vote in accepting the report before we leave today. As far as additional questions to staff, obviously staff will be here after today, and if people have questions they think that they'd be okay to postpone for a while, that's fine. If people have questions they want to ask the staff right now, that's fine as well. So, I mean, to me, the bottom line is simply, at some point today, I want to have a vote in accepting the report, And if you want to take some time in advance of that to ask questions of staff or other guests here, that's fine too.
So let me sharpen my pencil. So if it's, as of today, the will of the council that we establish some criteria for insurance or any other issue, do we put that on the table today and ask staff to come back with specific language?
I don't know, I think that would be reasonable. I mean, at this point, we have extended the pilot for another 120 days, and what we're looking at is what the final regulations will be.
Right.
And we're going to take some time to do that. So, I mean, we can give, I mean, if we have consensus, we can give staff some preliminary indication of what we'd want in final regulations. But it's not as if we're going to adopt final regulations tomorrow.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, speaking for myself, I didn't come prepared today to delve into the details of the insurance issue, knowing full well that we're going to have the committee take a look at this, and we have another 120 days, so I would feel very uncomfortable starting to do amendments on insurance today. I'm comfortable accepting the report or not and continuing the charge of the committee to come back to us, but we're going to have several bites at the apple here, and we've had several bites, and I don't want to sort of live and die these issues every time that we consider this issue.
Yes, and at some point, the council needs to make a decision on the policy questions. There are, in this memo that we were given dated August 20th, Portland Private for Hire Transportation Innovation Task Force recommendations relating to taxis and TNCs. There are, I believe, 20 different recommendations. I only agree with 5 of them. And it would seem to me to be helpful at some point before the committee continues on down the path that they've recommended for the council to give some direction, yes, no, or maybe on each of the recommendations.
But Commissioner, the committee has already issued their report, and we can do whatever we want with those recommendations.
What would be the process for deciding what to do with those recommendations?
Well, the process is we are going to propose final regulations to take effect before December 19th, and we will have a discussion among the council about what is acceptable and not acceptable in proposed regulations. But as far as the task force is concerned, I actually thought that as of last week, we should consider their work in this phase done. However, some task force members have indicated that if there are specific questions the council would particularly like them to consider further at this point, they have some capacity to do that. But of course, council doesn't have to ask the task force to follow up on specific questions. We can follow up on them in other ways.
Steve, let me frame the practical consideration just to get your thoughts. So the thing I want to avoid is in December, us agreeing to a set of regulations which the industry then says, well, we're going to need 6 months to transition into them. So, for example, we set insurance regulations in December, and people say, well, we're going to have to spend 6 months talking to private insurance, seeing if we can line it up, blah, blah, blah. And so there is a virtue at some point well before the end of the extended pilot period for the council to be clear about some of the baseline issues because the folks out here are going to have to, like around insurance, if we mandate certain levels of insurance, they're going to have to go find private companies that provide that insurance.
Actually, Commissioner, you've raised an excellent point, and that's actually the specific issue you raise is one that I wanted to ask Mr. Bryan about while he's here. How long does it take for the insurance industry to agree to sell insurance to people of a type and a coverage level they haven't before?
So again, let me suggest that we bring Mr. Bryan up and maybe staff as well, because I think there are at least some issues we ought to get before our experts as questions, regardless of what happens next. So please. Ms. Treat, you want to come up, Leah, and bring staff with you? Okay, I might be able to accommodate that later, but it's again, we're accepting a report here, so. Okay, who'd like to begin?
Well, at the risk of, well, let's stick with the insurance first. I did have one minor question I'll ask after the insurance presentation.
Mr. Bryan. Oh,
go ahead, Steve.
And first of all, actually, it'd be great if you could hazard an answer to the question that Commissioner Fish, in effect, just asked, which is, suppose we decided in the near future that we were going to tell the TNCs that they need to have a higher level of insurance during period 1. the TNCs have said that those products are not available. Some people in this council have the suspicion that if you call up an insurance company and say, I want X amount of coverage, what do I have to pay for it, they can answer that question pretty quick. So but do you have an answer to that question?
First, should I state my name for the record? I'm Kenton Bryan with Property Casualty Insurers Association. We're a national insurance trade association of about 1,000 member companies that write insurance. Some of them write locally, some of them write nationally, some of them write regionally. Our members write about 40% of the auto insurance policies in force across the country today. With that, there is not a simple, direct answer to what you're saying. I can confirm this. The policies that would be in excess of what is currently required under the agreement, the national agreement, and what's in place in Portland today, those policies do not currently exist because they're not required to exist. Insurance companies can be responsive. They've frankly been quite responsive to the emergence of this transportation alternative. Not only had I never heard of Uber 2 years ago, but insurance companies had not heard of Uber 2 years ago. And we spent a considerable amount of time coming to know how that business operates and frankly being on the opposite side of some of these issues from them initially. But we've come to an agreement on what those minimums can be and what carriers are willing to write. And that's currently set at those mandatory minimums that you have in place in Portland today. So,
If there was a new taxi company, they can get $1 million. Why is it different for a Uber company?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. Taxi companies are commercial enterprises, and they buy commercial insurance policies. What we're talking about is this hybrid of a person who is at one moment driving their private passenger automobile for private purposes, who then turns an app on their phone and becomes a commercial driving operator, or however it's defined in Portland language. And what insurers have tried to do is to say, we need bright lines between those two activities. When you're a private passenger, when you're just a regular driver driving your personal car for your own purposes, you're covered by your auto insurance policy that you purchase. When you switch over and turn that app on, you become something different to your insurer than what we signed you up for, and therefore you need a different kind of coverage. The kind of coverage that is contemplated in the national compromise between insurers and the TNCs, and what is included currently in place in Portland, says once the app goes on, there's TNC insurance, which is not classically commercial insurance. It could be sold by your private passenger auto insurance as a separate policy or an endorsement on your private passenger auto policy. But there's a line, and on one side of the line is you as a normal driver driving your own car. On the other side of the line is you as a driver picking up passengers for money.
But we could sell. Why can't we say that Uber is like a taxi company? Why can't they as a taxi company can get the commercial insurance?
I think that I don't want to speak for what Uber's position on this. I can tell you that in a long, at first battle, but then a negotiation process with Uber, insurers have come to see actuarially that the arguments that are made by the TNC companies are, at least near as we can tell so far, accurate. That there's a difference between an Uber driver and a taxi driver in that the Uber driver is, sort of, for lack of a better term, minding their own business when they don't have their app on. They're not the same risk as a taxi driver that is commercially driving all the time that they're in their vehicle.
We're talking about when the app is on.
Sorry?
When the app is on. When the app is on, they're a commercial driver. Why does there have to be a distinction between when they've accepted a ride?
I think that this gets into the argument about how the council sees the activities of Uber and whether they see them as a commercial driving enterprise or sees them as a company that provides an app that allows people to sign up and provide transportation services. They will say, I suspect, that their model is different and their drivers are different. And I'm saying, as an insurer, that's not really something I can speak to directly, but I can say that insurers are writing these TNC policies as endorsements or standalone policies because we agree that we don't see them the same way as we would see a commercial taxi company or commercial taxi driver.
But Mr. Bryan, I mean, I think the question we're asking is, what about if we required a certain level of coverage? Let's say the council did decide that as soon as you turn the app on, you have to have $1 million in coverage. I can see that there's sort of special negotiations between the TNCs and the insurance companies about what the rates should be. But in terms of just the level of coverage, if we imposed that requirement and Uber and Lyft said, well, it'll take us 1.5 years to figure that out with the insurance companies, would that be a plausible statement? Or would it be more plausible to say, well, if they got $100,000 worth of coverage now, just multiply the cost by 10 and we'll sell you a policy for that?
Well, there are kind of two. The direct answer to your question is, I'm not sure how long it would take exactly. It would take time. It wouldn't, I don't think it would take 1.5 years, but it would take time for insurance companies to do the math and figure out if that's a product they can affordably sell. The other question I think that's important for policymakers, because I've heard this come up several times today, it is absolutely any policymaking body's right and responsibility to make laws to protect the public and determine what those minimums ought to be. The question is, what will the financial and market impact be of those decisions? I think that it's fair to say, although I have to be cautious to not make what industry would do statements, because that's against antitrust law, federal antitrust law, but I suspect that the level of participation that would be in place in the insurance market would be different with a policy requirement, with a minimum requirement in the $1 million at all times range versus a minimum requirement.
So let's put it in terms that may be more familiar to some of us up here, that once upon a time put a child on their insurance policy for their own car. So I remember the
first time. Did that myself.
Yeah, so you and I
you feel my pain.
both feel the pain of having the conversation with our insurance broker and saying that we're going to put someone on. So I guess with my daughter, probably, I don't know, just for argument's sake, when she was 19 or 20. Now, the insurance company didn't say that there was a question about whether they could give me coverage, and they didn't spend a lot of time talking about actuarial stuff. They said, if you put your daughter on the policy, it's going to double your rate. And I said, well, boy, that's not the best news I've had today. So what are my other options? They said, well, you can increase your deductibles for certain things and essentially self-insure as a way of reducing your costs. And if your daughter has a clean record over time, you'll get a discount and things. So rather than, I never had a debate with my insurance broker about the mechanics of insurance. They just told me what it would cost, and I either put her on my insurance or not. And I don't understand why in the commercial context it isn't the same matter. I understand that you're saying that the cost may be at a level that Uber or TNC doesn't like. That's not the question we asked you. We're asking, is an insurance company going to underwrite the insurance if we mandate it? And since insurance companies underwrite college football players and underwrite horses and underwrite my daughter, why on earth wouldn't there be a market for underwriting a commercial policy at the limits that we set, regardless of what the secondary question is about what the cost is?
To be clear, I've never said there wouldn't be a market. I have said that the market would be a different market for that product than the market for a product that's in place today.
Okay, but you've also said, very tellingly, that in the industry's view, there's a different actuarial model for that period one.
Sure.
So why isn't that good news for TNCs? Because you've decided the industry can offer $1 million of insurance, but also through its own actuarial, through its own underwriting process, they can also make the judgment that's a pretty good business because it's very unlikely there's going to be much exposure during period one. Okay, so that's a good business. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is that it, in the first place, if you define it as commercial coverage, that limits the number of carriers or the type of carriers that can offer the coverage. It says personal insurance, writers of personal insurance policies can't enter that market unless they develop a commercial product, which has to be developed and approved by the insurance department and go through that process. And some companies would do that, and a lot of companies won't. There are a lot of companies out there that don't write commercial auto insurance. So you're limiting your pool of insurers. You're also limiting your pool of insurers who want to enter a market where the minimum limits are $1 million for that period one time period. Finally, I hope I'm answering your question. When you add your daughter to your policy, you're talking to your private passenger auto insurance company that's been writing private passenger auto insurance, maybe for you for a short time, but for the entire insurance buying public for maybe 100 years. So there's a lot of actuarial data, and they know what it's going to cost. So they have the data to price a product that, and they're going to compete with each other to provide that product for you and your family and the other drivers. In the case of this particular circumstance, we're talking about something that's new enough that's why it's difficult for me to say how long it would take a product to be developed, how much it would cost. And these are things that are sort of market-driven. They're also case law-driven. All the things that go into the price of the policy that you are providing for your daughter have been developed through years and years of case law and legislation and negotiated settlements in the course of auto accidents. So there's a lot of factors that go into pricing auto insurance policies, and some of those are not known yet. And the industry has tried to be responsive and develop products based on the known knowns, the things that they can actually actuarially price things out at, and that's what they're trying to do here.
Just so I'm clear, this is a complicated area, and I appreciate you walking us through it so clearly.
And I do want to be as clear as I can for you, so.
I hope you're on retain. I hope we can call you back on lots of issues because put it this way, I can understand you, which is saying something. So, what's where TNCs offer the lower coverage in period one? Are you suggesting that by and large that's just rider insurance to a personal coverage?
It can be. Yes, that's how it exists today in some markets.
So by keeping the limits low, it opens the door to this being coverage through private insurance, at least for period one, and the commercial insurance doesn't kick in until 2 and 3. So what we're really arguing about, so the concern you're raising is that if you displace private insurance in period one, you're not sure whether there's.
I think that there could be a commercial market for both period one and period two if the limits are set at that high level. I think that just based on even a layman's understanding of what private passenger auto insurers are interested in, there will be a lot fewer carriers that are interested in a market where the minimum limits are $1 million.
Could you just help me understand one other piece, and I appreciate your patience. In period one, where you turn on your phone and you're driving and you're waiting to get a ride, and you run someone over, God forbid. Are the current limits adequate for that event?
My guess is that if you are the victim of that accident or a family member of that accident, you may not believe so. However, public policy is a trade-off in a lot of ways, and one of the issues that arises for all drivers is those mandatory minimum limits. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt your question.
Still, yes, we make trade-offs, but for the person who was crossing an intersection who is run over and killed by a distracted driver, the extent to which they can get compensation for medical, for any liability is set now, at least with TNCs, at $100,000. And is that adequate?
That's really not a question I'm comfortable answering. I mean, that's a public policy question and issue.
The same person who is hit and killed in period two, I think would take some solace that we're up to $1 million. And I'm not sure I can make a clear distinction in my mind as to why we should have 1/10 of the insurance for the same event simply because of an accident of timing.
Actually, it's a 20th because it's 50,000 currently.
Excuse me, a 20th. So anyway, I'm struggling with that because it doesn't, if our public policy concern is consumer protection, protecting the victim, I'm not so sure why we value life so differently in period one versus period two.
I think ultimately, as we discussed the term trade-offs, the thing to be cognizant of as you make that determination is if you want to have these transportation alternatives existing in your city, It makes a difference how much it costs them to enter that market. It makes a difference how much it costs for insurance and permitting and all the other things that have been discussed here today. I'm not arguing that you don't have a right to set those and that you have to weigh the public policy and public safety concerns that you're raising. I'm just arguing that there is a cost impact to having a product where the minimums are here versus here, and there will be a market response to that from the people that you're
But
talking
let's
about.
be clear, we either externalize that cost on an unsuspecting public, or we ask an industry to incorporate that cost into their business model. And we typically frown on externalizing those costs on unsuspecting people.
And colleagues, if we are going to do this, then the whole part of what we've been talking about for the last several months is a level playing field. So the taxi companies currently have to have more insurance than the TNCs. I know, Commissioner Salzman, you said that you weren't ready to make a decision on this today. However, if it's going to take the companies a while to gear up, it might be wise to give some direction if 3 or more of us are looking at having the same rules across the board for insurance, that indeed they will need to provide insurance at $1 million, with the primary being the TNC, starting when the app is switched on. And you mentioned earlier about a bright line. That's a very bright line. You've got the app switched on. If you get into a crash when you're going to hit the screen because you're about to accept a ride, that's a clear cause and effect, and yet it wouldn't be covered at this point.
Well, it would be covered. It wouldn't have a minimum of $1 million coverage, but under the what's in place currently and what we have supported around the country, including in Oregon, there is coverage. It's the 25, 50, 100 minimum limit coverage.
Yeah, that doesn't cover even 10 days in ICU.
But it's not just that coverage. I mean, other coverages apply. Any coverage that's required by the state. And in Oregon, personal injury protection insurance is required for all drivers, and underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage are required by the state.
But sir, don't we run, I mean, isn't there a catch-22 here? I mean, aren't most insurance companies going to disclaim on the basis that they're going to say that the person was operating in a commercial context and their own insurance doesn't apply? My insurance on my car does not allow me to run a commercial.
Well, that's why we're talking about a separate product, TNC coverage that is required from the time the app goes on all the way through the ride.
Right, but it's with limits of 25, 50, and 100. What's
Until
the additional,
period 2,
What's
yes.
the additional coverage that you're referring to above and beyond that?
This national agreement language that we have pursued in Oregon and passed in 20 states so far says, if your state requires you as a private passenger auto driver to carry UM, UIM, and PIP coverage, it is required coverage in period 1 and period 2 under the TNC insurance policy. There is no gap. That's the whole purpose of seeking the legislation in every state, is to have no gap.
And that's the current law in Oregon?
No, we have not enacted that law in Oregon. We were not able to get that bill passed last session, but that is the language that's in place, as I understand it, in the existing pilot project in Portland.
That's right. But Commissioner Fish, you reminded me of another question that I wanted to ask Mr. Bryan, which is that we've heard some concerns over the last several months that that drivers might have their insurance canceled if they haven't told their insurers that they're going to be driving for a TNC. And that there might be a mass of cancellations, and suddenly the insurance companies hear that you're driving for TNC and they cancel your policy. There's also a concern expressed for passengers and also as people who a driver might hit, that it might in effect wind up being a retroactive cancellation, that a driver who's driving for a TNC might hit somebody and a claim is submitted to when they're driving for themselves, not with the national agreement coverage in period 1, 2, 3, that a driver might hit somebody and then a claim would be submitted against their personal insurance, and the insurance company will say, no, I'm not going to pay that claim because I didn't know that this driver was driving for Uber or Lyft, and if I had, I would have canceled the policy, so the policy is retroactively canceled. So I just wanted you to address those concerns and see how valid you think they might be.
Well, I have heard that concern raised, but I have never, ever actually seen evidence of it having occurred. I personally have no knowledge of that ever occurring anywhere in the country, and that's as far as I can respond to that specifically. But I have heard that concern, and I've heard legislatures express those concerns as we've talked about this bill. I have a 6-state region. I pursued this legislation in 5 of those 6 states, and it's been approved in 4 of those 6 states. Across the country, 20 states have enacted the very language that's in place in Portland today. 27 states overall have enacted some kind of regulations establishing insurance requirements for TNCs. Most of them, all except one, follow generally the same principles that are in place in Portland today. And what I think I need to state, if you were to go forward with something that had the different limits, the higher limits, you'd be the only place in the country that requires that. Now, if I may go back to your question, Commissioner. The insurers have had a lot of concerns about TNC drivers, and that's why we have been interested in this kind of legislation. What happens when you enact the kind of rules that are already in place in Portland currently, or might consider on a statewide basis, is that you're reducing the exposure that an insurer has to being charged for an accident when someone was driving their vehicle for commercial purposes. And talked about that bright line that I mentioned before. So there's not much incentive for an insurance company to cancel someone whose accident is covered by their activity, by a TNC insurance policy when they get into an accident on their private passenger auto policy. I can see them getting canceled if they have an accident on their private passenger auto policy. That does happen sometimes, if they've had multiple accidents especially. But tickets, accidents, those things that occur on one side of the line are the things that the insurers have exposure for. So there's not much incentive to say, now, we had a conversation once before, and I want to add the addendum that if insurers start asking you if you drive for Uber when you're not driving your car for personal purposes, and you lie about it on the application form, then they probably would have a reason to consider canceling you. But if they did how you phrased the question, I suspect there would be lawsuits and action by the insurance department against a company that did that kind of cancellation.
Okay, other questions from Mr. Bryan? It's been very helpful having you here, so thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime I can
Anything
help.
else for him? So thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So I think I want to suggest that Director Treat and Mr. Owens come up and join your colleagues here, because I just want to make sure we understand, along with Commissioner Novik's direction, where we're going. So what we have in front of us this afternoon is a report from the task force. The only action that we can take with respect to that report is either accept it or not accept it, because it's a report. But there are other steps ahead which all the testimony that we've heard in this hearing can help inform. One is council members need to articulate the issues or questions that we think need further work. And I want to put an asterisk on that and place that question to you, Commissioner Novik, and also to the team here, and that is, to what extent are we going to ask the task force to soldier on a little more and do some of that work, or is all that work going to fall on Ms. Treat and her staff and city attorney? You don't get to answer that question, he does, or the task force does, actually, because they're volunteers. So
Could I give a preview?
Yeah.
Can I just throw in a contender?
Sure.
I personally feel that we are at the point that we get to on planning issues where the next step is Planning and Sustainability Commission staff comes before us with a menu of options.
Right.
And we identify the areas where we want regulation, and staff comes forward with option A, B, C. They pitch an option, we debate it, but we decide.
Correct. And I guess I want to get to the how that happens. So again, today we got a report in front of us. We need to dispose of, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, that report. Decide it, say thank you or say never mind. And then the question is, again, there are issues that we want to address. We can ask staff to bring recommendations. Is there a reason, Commissioner Novik, in your opinion, to ask the task force to do some of that work versus your bureau?
I think it's an issue-by-issue question, and I think what I'd like to do is get the questions on the table, and then we can sort through, to some extent, right here and now, and then maybe we'll take on some of them some thought as to whether we'd want to ask the task force to do further review or whether we should just have staff do the review.
Okay, so here's what I would suggest. I have, and I bet others here on the council have, questions and issues based on what I've heard in this hearing, things like the renewal fee and obviously insurance, and even smaller issues like more cab stands, that I have an interest in having those issues considered and brought back for decision-making. So I want to suggest that, one, today we take a vote and accept or not accept the report. Two, very swiftly, I would say by tomorrow, each of us ought to make sure we get all of our questions to your office and to PBOT to say, I need more about this, I need more about that, I want to see options on this, right? All of us have got some of that, I bet all of us have some of that in mind. And then third, there's a schedule for what's going to happen next, which, as I understand it, on October 7th, right? That's when we're going to get the status report on the 120-day pilot, right? Correct?
That's
and
correct.
And then sometime after that is when we act on the final version of the regulations, correct?
Correct.
So it seems to me that by the end of September, we ought to have all that work done of vetting council's questions and options that we consider when we adopt those regulations. Am I making sense here in terms of a critical path?
You've won me over, but the one thing I would ask, because I think we all benefit from this, is I would ask that you give everybody on council an opportunity today
Sure.
to put their issues on the record.
Wouldn't hurt to
and
get some of them.
supplement them if necessary.
Yeah.
But I think we benefit from hearing each other and then making sure we have a comprehensive list. And then a sense from Commissioner Novick as to whether there are questions that are going to be answered or perhaps addressed by staff or are going to require the task force to review them.
All right. Jim, I understand that there are members of the task force, maybe all of them, that are willing to do more work if they're asked to by the commissioner.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, council members, the task force is willing to further delve in issues that
All right.
you asked them to do so. I think we're balancing here report ownership
Yeah.
factor with process fatigue.
Okay, well,
So we're willing, what the task force members have indicated is we have 2 meetings set up in September. We're hoping that the set of issues you forward to us for further reconsideration, we could deal with in no more than 2 meetings.
okay.
And I would offer this about the action on the report. This was a report on the taxis and T&C elements of the private for-hire transportation program. In September, we were going to further work on the limited passenger transportation element. We have not finished the recommendations on that piece. So
What is that? What is it that you're doing?
the limousines and town cars and
Limousines.
shuttles.
Okay.
So we intentionally held that element off and so that we could devote adequate attention to taxis and T&Cs.
I would suggest that we haven't actually finished the first task, so to start another one before we finish the first would not be
Well,
advisable.
we have started that one, so,
But I mean, we here.
okay, I know. But the point is, we were intending to come back to you with that element of the private for-hire transportation program. The task force was going to
task
hold
force.
recommendations on that element. So in essence, our report is not complete anyway.
But Jim, most of my questions, just for example, they don't need to go to the task force. I'm ready to have staff
Yeah.
come forth with language and commentary that we can then debate. I don't need to have it reviewed by another set of eyes. I think you've done a great
lot.
job
Yeah, I'm kind of there too.
getting us to this point.
And I would not like to move forward on the limousines just yet. In fact, I think there's something to be said for bringing in the private for hire board of review to come and look at what if we've designed this system to allow the TNCs, what then is the impact on the taxi companies and what do they want to do? Because several of my questions and concerns relate to keeping the taxi companies as viable businesses. And that cannot be done by the task force. I would think it has to be done by the private for hire board.
I would point out, one of the task force's recommendations is to do away with the private for hire board, and I'm inclined to support that.
I think the private for hire board should have some comments, or should be asked to give comments on that. Further, when we started this whole process, it was how do we allow this alternative transportation mechanism to operate in our city? I expressed my concern that I want there to be taxis who are viable for people like me who will never, ever get into a stranger's car and will never, ever get into a car that has not been properly vetted with government-sponsored background checks. Where we seem to be headed with the task force report is that there will be no company for people like me. There will be no vehicle that I can call with my phone, my landline, and pay with cash necessarily, that has had the necessary background checks done by government staff. And that's a big problem. It's not just dismantling. It's not just dismantling. It's not just allowing this other system to work. It's taking away the system that works for me and probably many of the other folks who are doing those 3 a.m. calls and who are preferentially calling taxis because they prefer the taxis and they trust the taxis. And at 3 a.m. when there's nobody around, you don't want to be screaming with nobody listening. You want to be in a cab with a camera and with every annual background checks, with daily supervisors looking to make sure that the windshield isn't broken. You don't want to be putting yourself in harm's way. And so we need to figure out a system. It seems obvious that there's a lot of support for allowing this alternative mechanism. That's fine. I just visited England. My 85-year-old mother is really good with texting on her phone, but she does not have a smartphone. She will never have a smartphone. She pays for her cabs with cash, and there has to be a service that's available as a public service, as a utility, as part of something that's part of the government structure. That still needs to be available. So doing away with everything and just going the route of complete deregulation doesn't work for me or for a lot of other people in Portland. And it's all well and good to design a system that works for the 2/3 of Uber driver passengers who are visitors. I'm concerned about the people of Portland and how people in Lentz get to their 3 a.m. pharmacy, and how I get to the places that I need to go to, and how I feel safe, because I trust our government workers to do the background checks correctly. I trust our government workers to provide the services that government's supposed to.
Commissioner, the issue of whether the background checks are all done by the government or done by the companies with private contractors that we audit is an issue of the task force has looked at that and made a recommendation. The recommendation, of course, is not binding on us. So I think that is an example of an issue that's for us to resolve, not to kick back the task force.
Yeah, and it's, if some folks, which they obviously are comfortable having third-party background checks done and driving in Uber, well and good. There are a lot of us who are not. And so I think that there's some places within this report where actually we do want to have different standards for the different kinds of transportation. And I would like the private for hire board to weigh in. How can we maintain a viable taxi system in this new reality? Are we going to continue? Are we going to allow these 3 new companies to come in? Are we going to further flood the taxi market?
Commissioner, actually, I would have to say that if there's a lot of people like you, then there will be a market for taxi companies. And they will continue to exist, because companies exist when there's a lot of people who they need to serve.
What if they're not regulated? I'm not going out at 3. I mean, I'm not going very often at 3 a.m. anyway.
I haven't heard anybody today say they don't want to develop a playing field that accommodates the TNCs and the taxi companies. Now, and that may have been a tune change from a few months ago, but that's what the line is. That's the party line we're hearing today. Everybody deserves to be in this market. And you're talking about the private for hire taxi board, which kept the moratorium on any new permits for I don't know how many years, but the private for hire taxi board is part and parcel of the taxi cab industry. And let's face it, if we want a true, unbiased board making policy decisions as it affects TNCs and taxi cabs, it's got to look different than the private for hire taxi board.
That's why I think the primary conversation here.
Not to digress here, but
but the primary conversation here needs to be between the city council and our staff.
And then I would like to have some.
Appreciate the task force. They've done their work. I'm prepared to vote to say thank you for your report. But everybody needs to understand, and your points, Commissioner Fritz, are great illustration of this. We are not adopting the recommendation. We are not implementing any recommendations as a result of thanking this committee and accepting their report.
Correct.
Right? Everybody understands that.
But we do
that we're
need to
not,
make-
This is not sleepwalking into legislation here. We are saying, we got your report, we appreciate your recommendations, thank you. That's what we do by adopting or accepting this report. But it's very important, and you just started to do that, that we articulate the issues that we want addressed before we adopt new final regulations. And you've just done a great job of that. I know you have more, and so do the rest of us. So again, I hear the request. What we ought to do is make sure each of us puts those issues out there today to the extent that we're ready, and understand that we might wake up tomorrow morning or walk out of here tonight and say, I got 3 more that I got to make sure that Leah and her team know about. So my suggestion again is that we start now and finish tomorrow, or at least by the end of the week, getting our requests for options for the council to consider back to us in a timely way. Does that work? So there's a couple ways we can do that. We can do that right now in turn, or we can do that as we vote to adopt the report.
Let's do it now, Mayor.
Okay,
so we get it on
that's
the
fine
table.
with me. So let's just start at one end and work our way along, and you get another shot in a minute. But let's
Jen?
start with Commissioner Fish.
Okay, first of all, thanks to everybody for the testimony and for this discussion. And I have a number of issues. They are not exclusive, because I think the report and the recommendations address a number of issues that I'm interested in. But I want to just drill down on a handful that have been highlighted through the testimony and I still have concerns about. Primarily, for me, it's the insurance question. And my own preference at this point is for parity, consistency across TNCs and cab companies. If there is any ambiguity at this point, I don't think there is, that the commercial policy has to be primary. Make that as clear as possible. And then I think there needs to be a consistent minimum of a minimum of $1 million in all 3 periods. And given what the gentleman told us about how the insurance industry works, I think that's an issue that the sooner the council reaches some consensus on that point, the fairer to all concerned, because it sounds like there's some work to be done with the insurance industry. The second thing for me is a more technical issue, and it's understanding what minimum standards of service means under 16.40.270. And frankly, this flows from a extraordinary meeting I had with some law students who've been looking at access and the code, and they persuaded me that under sub C, service citywide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, does not actually set forth the service standard. It's too generic. What does service citywide mean? And I'll give you an example. Someone took out an app and showed me that the further you get from the downtown area, the more likely for Uber, it's going to say no car available. Now, I understand that the rides in the inner city, that there are more customers in the inner city, and I understand, I guess, the argument that they're more lucrative. But this council will not tolerate redlining of service delivery. And if service citywide means what I think it means, then you do not frustrate the will of having citywide service by declaring to a potential customer that no cars are available simply because of your zip code. And I want to make sure that nothing that we are adopting permits redlining, effectively redlining communities, and it appears to be communities where it's most likely that people are lower income, more people of color, and also people with disabilities. So that has to be addressed. I continue to believe that it is unacceptable to allow for service agreements that are inconsistent with Oregon law or city law, and say that, well, but there's a catch-all clause that says local laws apply if they are different. Most people I know don't have lawyers on retainer to sort of figure those issues out. I think it's a disservice. I think it's bad for the consumer to put out information that may be erroneous and say, yeah, but we notified them that if it's inconsistent with local law, you get the benefit of local law. Who has the time to figure that out? I don't think it's asking a lot from a consumer point of view to say that the service agreements need to be tailored to the states in which these companies operate. And it seems to me a $50 billion company can figure that out. I'm going to defer to my colleagues on background checks because I'm not sure where I'm going to fall on that, although I think it's an issue about who does them and what's the standard. And I also will defer to my colleagues on the question of permit fees, but I'm now just, I don't really understand what we're doing. If you're a taxi company, you have to pay one permit fee and there's a renewal fee. If you're a TNC, you don't. If we're going to get to level playing field, I'd like to know what a level playing field looks like in terms of permit fees. And I'd like to understand what the cost to the city is of deferring on that question, because if we're just renewing permits during this experimental period and we're losing revenue, who's supposed to make up that revenue to then fund the enforcement of the system? So on both sides, I need more information. I'll join with the mayor in saying I'd like to know about the, and Mayor, you had mentioned you were going to raise this, and I just want to encourage us to put it on the record. In the testimony from Mr. Waco, he says add cab stands at various locations. It seems to me to be a thoughtful recommendation, and I'd like to know if that's possible, and I would like to have that included. And frankly, for the next phase, when staff comes back with recommendations, again, I hope it's in consistent with what we get like on our land use proceedings, where they're complicated issues. The issue is framed. We have options, more than one option in certain instances, and then we have a debate with staff commentary. But I think there's enough complexity here that if you break it out the same way Planning and Sustainability Commission does on complex land use and zoning issues, it'll be easier for us to follow, and frankly, even more important, I think it'll be easier for the public to follow our decision-making. Thank you for your good work.
Okay, thank you. Helpful. Commissioner Saltzman, have you got some things to put on the table?
Well, I think, most of my policy requests are going to come after we actually have some real data. And that is the conclusion of the trial period. Because the data, really sort of defies some of the myths, I guess, we're being asked to rely on in a lot of the testimony. And, for instance, last week we heard that, wheelchair access was not available through Uber or Lyft. And then we heard the data, and they're actually responding in less than half the time of taxi cabs. So I really want to see the data at the end of this 120-day trial period to help form some of the policy questions I'm going to have about whether we really have a level playing field. And that's really what I want to see. I think that's what everybody wants to see, is a level playing field, whether that's insurance coverage, whether it's 24/7, whether it's geographic, whether it's wheelchair access. Performance standards, that seems to be the hue and cry I'm hearing. And if we want to sort of cut through, all the fog, we're going to need the truth out there. And as I raised last week, getting to the truth, I think, is really the crux of the matter here. And I think, one of the things I suggested last week, and I will reiterate again, is that we look at making sure we have a robust, well-funded compliance program. And I suggested last week maybe a 50-cent per trip charge to help fund compliance efforts. Maybe that's in lieu of the permitting fees, because the permitting approach seems so different for a TNC versus a taxi cab, although it's still mystifying. So I think, I really want to reserve judgment other than what I just said: universal service, 24/7, and wheelchair access. I'm certainly open to looking at, the insurance issues are vexing, and, just in my own conversations with my own insurance companies, it's vexing. I barely can track it. So I want to understand it better, and I appreciate the information we received today. And certainly $1 million in period one seems like something we should take a close look at, and that's, so I guess, and then I also did appreciate the testimony about the cab stands. I don't really understand the cab stand issue, but it sounds like something that is something that we need to look at too. And yeah, so I guess I'm going to reserve judgment other than accepting the report today on where we need to go in the policy arena.
Okay, let me, I'll run through my list, and some of these are redundant, but just in case I missed something, I'll go ahead and mention them all. First, there are a couple of informational issues that I want to make sure, in addition to the ones that have already been raised, that I want to have data on. One was raised in testimony today, and I'll go get that from the Police Bureau or ask them to coordinate with PBOT, and that is, do we have any indications yet with respect to drunk driving? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? It's a short time period. It's summer, so they may say, we can't tell, but I'm going to at least go ask the question. We have had 21 or 22 traffic-related fatalities this year. Every year, some of those involve drunk driving. I don't know where we stand with respect to a typical year, and that's, of course, crashes that are non-fatal involve alcohol as well. So that's one. To the extent that we have useful information, I want to go ask and find out. Another issue that hasn't really come up lately, but it certainly came up during the early days of discussion about this issue, and that is it's never been our intention in Portland to default to what's happening in the suburbs around us on this issue or many others for that matter. But I'd like to know what's happening and that we're in a metropolitan area. We're 600,000 people out of 2 million. There are 24 cities that surround us. I think I know the answer to that question, which is they're not regulating this at all. Again, that doesn't mean that we want to go there, but I think it would be useful to find out what's happening out there in the cab industry and in the TNC world with respect to the rest of the metropolitan area. To the extent that there's any information, I think that would be useful for us as a community to know. Issues where I want to have options and decisions for the council. One is the renewal fees. What should they be? How do we level the playing field, as others here have articulated? How do we provide a stronger incentive for wave trips? This idea of an accessibility fund, is that viable? How would it work? What would it cost? Let's hear back about that. Cameras, are we requiring them for cabs? Should we be requiring them for TNCs? Drug and alcohol testing. Of course, the overall issue of caps themselves, I know what the task force's recommendation is, but what's the Bureau's recommendation? And then, yes, this smaller issue about cab stands. If we're going to try to preserve, as I think Commissioner Fritz has wonderfully articulated, the option of using a viable, profitable cab company or the option of using a TNC here in Portland, does providing more cab stands for the cab companies help keep them in profitable business? And also, oh, by the way, provide more service to the public, which is what this is all about. We're supposed to be regulating this industry because we're supposed to be maintaining a level of safe transportation service for the general public. So those are the items on my list. I think I captured them all.
So the first issue is income to the city and financial impacts on the city services. We currently have 753 permitted taxis in the city of Portland. Each of them pay the $600 renewal fee. That's a total of just over $450,000 that comes into now PBOT. We now have conservatively about 2,000 new TNC drivers. If they were to pay the $600 a year, we would have $1.2 million. One of my reasons for supporting the legalization of Airbnb was, first of all, that we could have a system where homes could be checked for safety, and second of all, that we knew we were going to get the lodging taxes paid directly to the city. We all know that we have a big challenge with transportation funding. This may be an opportunity not only to get better regulation and enforcement of our private for hire system, but also to raise some revenue. And several of the Uber and Lyft drivers last week suggested that they would be willing to pay an annual fee. The concern is that since there's so many more part-time drivers, they're not going to be reaching the $50,000 a year threshold to pay business income taxes. So I want to know, how much did we get in business income taxes from the taxi companies and from the drivers last fiscal year? What could be the potential impact of the reduction in business income taxes? What are the fiscal challenges? Presumably, we've been funding our city staff with the permit fees that have been paid. I want to see a plan for how we're going to have adequate number of enforcement staff and how the companies are going to pay for them. Because the city needs to not just have other systems set up, we need to be able, at the very least, to verify that we've got compliance with insurance, vehicle maintenance, access, background checks, and such like. So that's a big concern that I have regarding just the money part of it. How much is it costing us now, which Commissioner Fish said, but how much is it going to cost us in the future? And how are we going to pay for adequate staffing? Then going through the task force's recommendations, they suggest that all companies would get their own background checks, which, as I've already said, is totally unacceptable to me. And I don't see that, since many of our drivers have said it's not burdensome for them, from the taxi companies, to continue having us doing their background checks. I don't know why we would take that option away from them. I do think we need to look at the permit fees for the companies, which don't make any sense, in my opinion, that the initial fee in some cases is less than the renewal fee, which I don't understand why that would be. Replacing the board of review, yes, that makes sense for the overall system, but what we really need to do in the next couple of months is to have the taxi companies get together and figure out what would make your industry continue to be viable. What does the city need to do? What do you need to do to be able to provide that service that I and others value so much? Because we're not going to choose the alternative. The recommendation is that permit approval and denial would be assigned to the commissioner in charge of transportation and delegated to PBOT, not to the advisory committee and not to come to council. I think that we need to discuss, that the taxi companies need to discuss, how do you decide what the right number of taxi cabs is, given that we may have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, however many unlimited numbers of Uber drivers. What's the right number of taxis in order to be able to preserve a viable system? And there does seem to me to be some, I'd like you to discuss, and PBOT to come back with a recommendation on, should we continue to limit the number of taxi cabs based on supply and demand. The third recommendation is about record keeping. It sounds very good. However, there needs to be a mechanism to fund and verify the funding fund the verification of all of these reporting requirements. I do agree with some of the testimony that said that the TNC driver should have large magnets on their car that is much more clearly identifying them as a TNC. A phone number to call in large numbers, because remember, we're the folks who have the old flip phones and other landlines that we're not going to just dial up the app on our smartphone.
Commissioner Fritz?
Yes.
Would you yield on one point?
Yes.
I wasn't here for the conclusion of the last hearing. Did we get a response to the question that was asked about who the local agent is and what the phone number is for both Lyft and Uber?
Nope.
Yeah, no, we got it.
Yeah, we looked up, they both have local agents of service. Uber has a local office with a 503 telephone number and staffed. Lyft has an email and an 800 number for complaints.
Just want to acknowledge that it took the city council, a couple of weeks to unearth that, and now you're putting that in the record, but how on earth is a customer supposed to figure all that out?
Yeah,
So
that needs to be clearly posted.
I think I'm glad we've resolved it, but it now needs to be broadcast so that a customer can get that information.
Well, more particularly a bystander who may be aggrieved as well. Thank you, Commissioner Fish. I appreciate you clarifying that. So on page 2, the next item is about the company permits, and as I said, I think that needs to be discussed in much more detail. The next item is the citywide service, which Commissioner Fish covered eloquently. The next one is about maximum fare rates for taxi cabs, and the recommendation is to get rid of mandated fares and caps. How on earth is a consumer supposed to know which cab to get into if we don't have a regulated system? They're supposed to go down the entire line of the taxis to find out who's going to give them the best deal. That doesn't make any sense to me. So again, that's something that I think that the taxi drivers should be working on and helping to give us a recommendation. The surge pricing I don't think works for taxis either. Street hailing it needs some enforcement. What's the enforcement mechanism? You can actually now hail a TNC, and they will then tell you as they pull over, oh, you need to put on your app and request me, and then I'll accept you, and then then you can get into my car. That doesn't seem to be in the spirit of what we're doing, and so there needs to be much more education. What's the plan for education for community members that they are not supposed to be doing that, if indeed we continue with that regulation? I agree with the waiting in the taxi zone area. The TNC vehicles, in this section at the bottom of page 2, it doesn't list cameras as a requirement for taxis, but in the next section on page 3, it does list cameras as a requirement for taxis. I suggest that we need to continue having cameras in taxis because, again, that's one of the things that makes me feel safer and is safer for the drivers. So I agree with the first part on number 3. On page 3. The background checks, as I've already expressed, it's just I don't trust private corporations to be able to do the kind of verification that I do trust our city staff to do, and I appreciate the diligence that the city staff have done. The driver working hours, I'd be interested to know how that's going to be enforced and how are the TNCs currently being asked to tell us how many hours their drivers have the app on, and I'd like to know what those hours are. The transparency regarding the next one is about the driver kiddies or fees, and it's suggesting to do away with floors or ceilings on driver kiddies and fees. That doesn't seem to protect the taxi drivers very well, and so I think that again needs to be discussed by the taxi companies and their drivers with a recommendation. On page 4, it suggests that the company has a responsibility for administering a city-approved training and testing program and required defensive driving training. Again, I don't trust the companies to do that. We've heard testimony and gotten emails about drivers being allowed on one of the TNC's platform while they were waiting for their background check to come back, and that's just not acceptable. There needs to be penalties for when the wheelchair accessible vehicles are not required. I think that is one of the big positives of this experiment, this pilot, is that we have focused much more on providing the wheelchair access vehicles, and I agree that having some kind of a per ride on all riders' fee to then pay triple to those providing WAV service seems like a very good way around it. And then again, I'm still concerned about the additional cars on the street. It was interesting that we were discussing this morning about congestion and thinking about all of these cars now doing the additional rides. So the last page on 5 is the insurance issue. I have to tell you that it is very hard for me to listen to people asserting that $50,000 for a person's life is an adequate amount of compensation, and that $100,000 per incident. The driver that killed my husband 48 weeks ago today had $300,000, which is above the state minimum by a long way. However, there were 4 people injured or killed in the crash, and so I still have not had a penny of that insurance yet. And so certainly money doesn't compensate for the love of a lost one. $50,000 wouldn't even cover the medical bills of our friend Carrie Fairchild. So these insurance limits, I think that's something I've said before that we need to put on our legislative agenda to get our state limits changed. If people are driving commercially, at the very least, they need to have the same as the taxi companies, which is $1 million per occurrence, $2 million in aggregate, $500,000 for the vehicle. And I would like to see if we can require that sooner rather than later. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Portland was the best and safest place in the entire country to hail an Uber, because at least you'd know you'd be covered. And then, as the insurance expert told us, there will be the question of, does Uber and Lyft actually want to operate in our city if we require them to have adequate levels of insurance at all times? That's their choice. That's where the free market comes in. That's where responsible drivers come in, and that's the policy that I think we should be doing sooner rather than later. We did have some very compelling testimony from Wendy Kellington last week regarding the insurance and regarding EcoCab having been told that their insurance was fine and then being told it was not fine. She sent us some additional testimony. Apparently, we're already implementing that all insurance policies must carry an AM Best company rating of A-8. I have no clue what that is, but the council hasn't directed that yet, so I don't think EcoCab should be penalized for following the previous policy when we haven't changed it yet. Second of all, they raised the issue of having an insurance company that's accepted in the state of Oregon and that has backup insurance from the state of Oregon should the insurance company go bust. And I think that I would want more information on that. I want us to look into that because, again, we should be supporting Oregon companies, not off-state or out-of-country offshore insurance companies that are not going to stand behind either the company or the driver should something terrible happen. And so that's another piece of making sure that the insurance is acceptable in the state of Oregon.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, what have you got?
So on the issue of permit fees, that's something staff is actively working on right now. We want to come up with a system that is fair and that does cover the cost of enforcement and compliance monitoring. And we are postponing the renewal fees for the taxis until we have figured out a new system. I have to say that we need to come up with enough money to fund a system that's unlike any we've had before. Because I have to tell you that 6 months ago, we did not have aggressive monitoring and compliance and enforcement of the taxi cabs for a variety of requirements. We did the background checks, we did the vehicle inspections, but we did not have people out checking at all hours of the day and night to make sure there was truly citywide 24/7 taxi service, including for people who need WAVs. So that's a new thing for us, which I'm very much committed to doing. And as Commissioner Fritz said, there needs to be penalties for not meeting those standards. Last week, I saw some data that indicated that for the TNCs, they clearly were not meeting those standards, and I think that we do need to start moving towards penalties. I need more data actually on whether the taxis are meeting those standards, and I asked staff to start more aggressively gathering that data. So the permit fees is an issue we're actively working on. We want to come up with a fair system. Responding to what Commissioner...
What about a 50-cent
that
per
actually is,
trip charge?
I don't dismiss that as an option, Commissioner Saltzman. I'd like staff to figure out whether that might make more sense. Okay. I appreciate that suggestion. I agree with Commissioner Fish and Commissioner Fritz that if we are going to require a higher level of insurance for period 1 than is in the, quote, national agreement, we need to serve notice of that now. And I have to say that at present, there's not a final decision, but I am inclined to say that we need higher levels of insurance in period 1. I note that last week, Mike Greenfield, the head of the task force, although he was speaking solely for himself, said he doesn't see the reason for the big difference between period 1 and periods 2 and 3. So I see that at least one of the representatives of Uber is still here. We'll get in touch with Lyft and just sort of serve notice that we need to start thinking about how to go about getting a higher level of insurance in period 1. So those are, oh, and one more thing. I do want Commissioner Fritz to be able to continue to call a taxi when she needs one. I am not sure that it makes sense to have one set of background check requirements for taxis and another for TNCs. Maybe that's a road we want to go down, but I want to ask the question. I mean, I recognize the task force's recommendation is to have the background checks solely handled by private companies. I want to get a sense of how much of a sort of administrative burden it would be on the police and the lead system, et cetera, if we simply had the government do background checks for everybody. So that's an issue that I think requires further discussion.
You know, I asked Chief O'Day about that in our first consideration of this issue, and I was told by him that LEDS is kicking off cities doing background checks on taxi drivers. So
I think,
check on that.
Yeah, actually, my understanding is that LEDS has sort of the state police has sort of asked us to justify using leads to do background checks on taxi drivers, and I don't actually know if that means that they're about to kick us off or they just want us to give a reasonable explanation.
Mayor, can I, in light of something my friend Dan said, can I clarify my request on access? So Dan said we need to make our decision based on data, we need to lift the fog. He wasn't referring to fats, oil, and grease. So I agree we need to make good policy on the basis of data. The concern that I have is that it's apples to apples data. And if the TNCs are effectively excluding whole sections of our community from service, then I'm not particularly impressed with the cherry-picked numbers on service times. If we are requiring that they serve the city, which is the minimum requirements in the statute I referred to earlier, then I don't want to base a future decision on data that is based on the calls they are choosing to take and lose track of the fact that there's a lot of people who are not getting access to the service because their app says there's no car available. And so you have to, if we're going to require universal service, I don't want cherry-picked data that has misleading service times, nor does Dan. There's no daylight between Dan Salzman and me in terms of wanting to have an adequate level of service for disabled residents of our community. But if you can simply frustrate our system by not providing service, and then you report that you've got good response times in the inner core, that's not consistent with what I think this council intends to regulate. So if you are required to provide service to everybody, then I don't want to be looking at apps that indicate that by the time you get to 82nd, if that's where you're initiating your call, there's no service available. Because then you're essentially saying there's no service for disabled residents, and the other data does not impress me.
Question for staff. On the taxi company's app, Curb, does it work the same way and you could look at the Curb app and see whether there's service available? Like look over a geographic area?
And I think the other piece of that, Commissioner Fish, is the scheduled rides that taxi cabs do. Those haven't been included in the on-time data.
That's correct. It was an on-demand comparison.
Yes, I think in order to be fair, we need to be looking at the scheduled rides as well, and assuming that they are, unless there's a complaint or some evidence that they're not being picked up on time, that's service too. And that's how people like me use cabs. We schedule them ahead of time.
Mayor?
Yes.
I move the report.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Further discussion on accepting the report? Roll call, please.
Salzman.
Aye.
Novick.
I want to, again, give my profuse thanks to the members of the task force who have put in, as Mr. Owens pointed out, more than 700 hours of their time analyzing these issues, hearing testimony from a wide variety of people, and responding to questions posed by citizens and by this council. We're not going to implement every one of the recommendations of this task force. There's some even that I take issue with, but the work of the task force has been extraordinary and the staff support has been extraordinary. And I'm honored to have had the opportunity to assemble this task force. And I'm still amazed that most of the people we initially asked to serve in the task force agreed to do so. We have a group of fantastic people doing a lot of very hard work, and I can't thank them enough. Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you to the task force, Jim Owens, for facilitating, and for Leah and all your staff. This is a very challenging issue. We're looking at doing things very differently from how we've done it before. Also want to thank Claire Adamsick on my staff, who has been on my staff for the last 6 months, and I think has spent the majority of her time on this issue. So she's done an amazing work. We are getting closer to addressing the real needs of all in our community, and I think it's clear that there needs to be room for the different kinds of options. We need to make sure that those different kinds of options are viable for the kinds of people who are using them. Capitalism is not a system that works particularly well for providing services, especially public services. Competition doesn't always ensure adequate coverage, wages, or benefits when profit is the sole motive. And the question we're asking is, to what extent should government be involved in providing for this type of service? I do see this as part of the public transportation system, and I trust government, which I know a lot of people don't, but I've been involved for the last 6.5 years, and I trust government workers, and I know that our staff, first in revenue, now in transportation, do great work in doing those background checks, in making sure that the inspections are done, in doing the spot checks, and I don't trust out-of-state corporations. One of the roles of government is to provide for public safety and for orderly provision of service, and we need to continue to be able to do that. We also need to be able to support our businesses. I think one of the testifiers said preserving full-time jobs is not one of our roles on the City Council. I disagree. It absolutely is. Providing gainful employment for Portlanders is definitely one of my big concerns. We need to make sure we have the regulatory safeguards in place, that we're meeting the core standards, and I don't know that we have that yet. I do expect that when we see the trip pattern data in October, we'll get a clearer picture of the late night service and the service to the communities in Outer East. And I will be interested to get a clearer picture from staff as to how we're doing to ensure compliance. I'd like to see the reports from the inspection staff, specifically with examples of what they've seen out there in the community. And I want to see how are we going to fund to make sure that at the very least we still have adequate enforcement within the city. As I've mentioned, the insurance coverage is huge, and Commissioner Novick, I appreciate your willingness to look at asking the companies to implement the commercial levels as soon as possible, because I think that it's crucial, and it's only a matter of time before something tragic happens, and I want to make sure that in that awful instance, at least, the family doesn't have to worry about whether they're going to lose their house as a result of a commercial driver having a crash. Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this, and thanks to everybody who's participated in this process. It's been a meaningful community engagement process, and your input has made a difference on all sides, and so you should feel good about that. Aye.
Fish.
Well, this vote is to accept a report, and I have expressed my deep misgivings about the process and my deep skepticism that we can get to a level playing field, but that's not what we're voting on right now. Our vote is to accept a report and to thank the task force for the time and effort they put into giving us the recommendations. And it is one of our great traditions of this body that when we ask a group of citizens to do a lot of hard work and produce a report, we set aside our differences at moments like this and we simply say thank you. And if we didn't, we'd have a hell of a time getting people to serve on these task forces in the future. So whether we agree or disagree with any of the recommendations in this report, that's not what we're doing right now. Right now, we are celebrating the fact that citizens in our community devote lots of time to help us make complicated decisions. And this is an excellent report and has helped shape what I think is one of the more interesting discussions we've had in the council in a long time. Also, thank you to Bureau staff for all of your work. I'm not sure where this is going to end for me, but I do agree with Commissioner Fritz that all sides of this debate have stepped up and have raised the quality of the debate so that whatever decision we make, whether you agree with it or not, it will certainly be informed by all the time and energy we're putting into it. So I'm enormously grateful for that. And I echo Commissioner Fritz's comment, Steve, that I appreciate that a consensus is now forming around insurance, and I do agree with you that we need to send that signal early on. I don't want to come back in December and find out that it's a 6-month lag to actually implementing it. So thanks to my colleagues, thanks to everyone who has been participating. Aye.
Ailes.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Novick, Peabot, and again, our task force. Well said, Commissioner Fish, for weighing in and giving us some guidance so far. More work, obviously, ahead to do, quite a bit of it based on what the council has laid out here already in this discussion. And again, I want to make sure that everyone understands that we can lob a few more questions and requests in if they are either suggested to us or occur to us over the next couple of days, so that you have your full scope of work in front of you. You know, from the beginning, of our work on these issues of the new economy, as some call it, we've tried to find a good place for Portland to land. And we were confronted by the eruption of people renting out their spare bedroom through websites in ways that didn't conform to our old regulations about hotels, motels, and room taxes. And we've tried to figure out a way for that piece of the new economy to operate legally in our city. Both words are important. We want to try to make it operate because there is change all around us in this tech-friendly city in a tech-suffused world. So there's change all around us. Many have suggested that we should deal with that, and we're trying. But we also have some old public responsibilities about safety that never go away, and about trying to support local businesses that should never go away. And that's the middle ground that we're trying to find. And I hope everyone understands that we're trying to find that. In the now infamous meeting that Commissioner Novick and I attended, my first face-to-face meeting with anyone from Uber was where I told them we will begin discussing this topic when you stop breaking the law. And they stopped breaking the law, and we started trying to work on these regulations, and we'll keep trying. So everyone, I think, in this room needs to understand that this is a city council of goodwill with excellent staff and some great citizen advisors who are trying to find a way into some difficult topics. I'm always happy for Portland to be first. It seems like that happens more often than not. Bill de Blasio's been calling me about this issue rather than me calling him and say, how did you figure this out? And that is kind of normal, it seems to me. Portland usually does these things first and better, and I'm okay with that, even though I would like to be informed by what's happening around us. But I think it's important to remember that around us, either cities have tried to keep these new services entirely at bay, or they have utterly surrendered, as I believe all 24 jurisdictions around us have. And neither of those is acceptable, I think, again, in a new economic world and where we're trying to be responsible and support local businesses. Finally, one little piece of this that just keeps bubbling up, but it needs to be articulated, and that is we regulate these businesses for a reason or for a set of reasons, and they've been well expressed here today. But it's always important to remember, even though I sound a little pedantic when I say it, that driving an automobile is a privilege, not a right. That's why we have a license. You get licenses for privileges. You don't need a license for a right. There's no right to drive an automobile, as outrageous as that might sound in the United States of America, or at least in Texas. But it is not a right to drive an automobile. It is a privilege. And driving an automobile for pay is an even higher privilege. So regulation is completely appropriate. And I think the folks that are enamored of the power of the market always need to remember that in this debate or any other. I think we will find a way forward in this. We're not there yet. We're trying. I really appreciate the fact that we have tried some things. Government doesn't do this very often, and I want to commend Commissioner Novick again in a difficult environment here, of trying some things, of innovating, of experimenting. Government doesn't do that often, but this is one of those cases where I think it makes sense to do that. And then get the data, get the conclusions, write the regulations, and give people some certainty about the future. I think we can do all that. I appreciate the good work so far. Look forward to the next phase of the discussion. Aye. Thank you all, and we're recessed till tomorrow at 2 p.m.